My great kingdom of Italy. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201 Opportunity. In the new year, the breath of spring makes people feel happy, and Amma is in an equally happy mood today. Although the harvest in the village is not very good this year and everyone's life is a little difficult after paying taxes, this does not include Amma, because he has ways to generate income in other ways. Amma woke up early and looked at his own image in the mirror. He saw that it was very good and there were no flaws. Satisfied, he picked up the hidden cross and put the shiny silver gadget into his pocket. This is his way of making extra money, so there can be no surprises. Otherwise, the income from one bag of wheat a month will be wasted. Hallelujah. Amma made a graceful sign of the cross on his chest, elegant and skillful. I believe that Allah will also understand me, and I can gain forgiveness from Allah if I pretend to be necessary for survival. After praying in his heart, Amma said goodbye to his wife and left. Before leaving, he also looked at his two lovely children. The village where he lived was 8 kilometers away from his destination Zabadani. In order to make time, he got on his donkey and hurried out of the village. There is a Christian church in Zabadani, and that is his destination. Originally, his attitude towards this church was the same as everyone else's. Why didn't His Majesty the Sultan's officials drive these heretics out? But now, he thinks these pagans still have some effect. Of course, this is the understanding that started 2 years ago. At that time, the old priest of this church left, and 2 new young priests came. Then the Christian church in Zabadani changed. The 2 young priests were not like the old priest who kept nagging people to believe in God. Instead, they claimed that, as long as they believed in God, each person would receive a bag of wheat. Although the remarks of these 2 people were denounced by the respected imam as selling their souls to the devil, they still made many people who were short of the bag of wheat sneak away to feel the breath of God. It was at that time that Amma also felt the breath of God, and each of them actually received a £50 bag of wheat. Then the new Father Bran announced that, since everyone felt the Lord's care, they needed to read the Bible. Of course, he considered that many of the people present were illiterate, so he announced another decision. That is, every week, he would explain the Bible to them, and anyone who could remember it would receive 2 bags of wheat. And because he remembered the most, he was awarded 2 extra bags of wheat. In addition, Father Bran also gave him a benefit. He would go to church every week to teach others about the Bible. And he would also receive a bag of wheat every month. This kind of income is not low at all. It is as much as his income from farming. You must know that after the harvest, after deducting the rent and taxes, he will get more than £1,000 of grain. And these are not just wheat. There are also many miscellaneous grains in them. Therefore, Amma cherishes the wheat income very much. Although he only has God in his heart, why can't he earn food from pagans? Along the way, Amma was planning this year's income, whether he could buy something for his wife and 2 children, and whether he could save some for the future. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't even notice that as he approached Zabadani, there were a surprising number of pedestrians on the road. Moreover, the faces of these people were a little different, with a hint of nervous expectation, and even a look of getting their wish. Even if you pay a little closer attention, you can see that there seems to be something inside their robes. At this time, Amma, who came back to his senses, realized that today's situation was a little different, because at the gate of Zabadani town, he saw people standing at the intersection of the town, and the respected Agali Imam was standing on a high platform that had been set up. He was speaking to the dark crowd in front of him. By Allah, ever since those 2 infidels came to town, the Imam's speech made Amma understand what was going on. Originally, the Christian church and the mosque were incompatible with each other. Suran couldn't stand the other side, but they could still maintain a balance. But this time there was a private joke between the 2 priests, which involved the prophet, and this happened to be overheard by others. Word spread that the 2 priests had insulted the prophet. Now the Imam of the mosque, Agali, quit. He had long seen the dissatisfaction of these two pagans bribing God's people, and now he dared to insult the prophet, not letting them know how powerful they were, and thought that the green religion was easy to bully. So under the call of the imam, young adults from all over the country gathered. On the pillars on the side, there were hung several killed people. These people were known to Amal, and they were all people who had been to the church many times. He also drank coffee with one of them named Ali. Broken upon seeing this scene, Amana could not understand what was happening. But at this time, he couldn't care about other people, because someone was pointing at him and shouting, "This is the traitor who used to go to church, who turned his back on God, and went to listen to the voice of the devil." As soon as someone pointed it out, Amma immediately realized that something was wrong. At this time, any rebuttal was useless, and he ran away with one word: from now on. There was nothing to say. Amma got on the donkey and slapped him hard on the butt without caring about the donkey. The stinging mouth of the donkey let out a cry of hey and say as he ran into the town, but no one caught him. Amal, who was riding a donkey and galloping all the way, realized something was wrong when he rushed into the town, because people were surrounded on the road. Judging from their makup and the various weapons in their hands, they were all mobilized. Ruined. After groaning inwardly, Amma could only bite the bullet and rush forward. They would not let him go if he stopped. Facing the donkey knight charging straight towards him, a powerful man with a ferocious smile raised his scimitar and pointed it at Amal. It was obvious that if he rushed down, his life would be at risk. How could Amma stop at this time? To stop would be to seek death, so he could only rush in with his eyes closed. Snapped. A gunshot gave Amma a chance, because the strong man who was wielding a machete fell down unwillingly, clutching his bleeding chest. Others on both sides were startled by the gunfire, which gave him a chance. The donkey broke through the blockade and headed directly towards the church, because the gunfire just now came from the church 200 meters away. After Amal rushed over, those who blocked the blockade reacted. They immediately wanted to rush to the church with angry expressions. Snapped. Another shot hit one of them, causing him to scream, and this sound made these people control their emotions, so they retreated again. And Amal rushed into the church in one breath. At this time, the door of the church was opened, and Father Bran held a rifle and waved at him. Coming quickly, Amma, who was not paying attention to the donkey, rushed in with 3 steps at a time. As soon as he entered, he found that the situation was not good. Except for the 2 priests holding guns, the other 6 or 7 original church members were only holding sticks and knives. Amma, thank God for blessing you. After Father Bran patted his shoulder, he took out a stick and handed it to him. Hold the church and protect it. We need to wait for the Ottoman army in Damascus to rescue us. Father Bran's words did not inspire Amal, because they were 60 kilometers away from Damascus. Although it was not too far, half of it was mountainous, and it would take at least a day to wait. And can they wait a day? Looking at the growing number of irritable people outside, Amal had no confidence. And he also saw that they had taken out torches. Chapter 202 Uproar. The Ottoman army finally arrived at Zabadani, but by the time they arrived, the church had become a piece of scorched earth, which was the mark of being burned by fire. After some searching, they only found a few burned corpses, which made it impossible to identify who they were. Faced with this situation, the Ottoman officer leading the team knew the seriousness of the problem, and lesson plans were not unique to the Far East. He immediately reported the matter to Damascus, and detained Imam Ghali, the culprit who caused the church to be destroyed, and more than a dozen key figures captured after interrogation. But although he handled the situation well, he couldn't hide the matter at all. A few days later, Italy's Florence Evening News first published this report. In the newspaper's report, 2 innocent Italian priests were persecuted by Ottoman religious forces, and their ghosts have been lingering in Syria. At the end of the newspaper, it was written that this does not rule out the fact that local religious forces have obtained the government's approval. Otherwise, how could such a tragedy happen in a small town only 60 kilometers away from Damascus? Even though the Florence Evening News was relatively reserved, the report still caused an uproar. The media that followed up the report later became even more outspoken. This tragedy was the Ottoman government's tacit approval. Some newspapers even wrote that the whole thing was planned by the Ottoman government, who did not want their people to see the light of the Lord shining on the land. This was a bit excessive, as they completely ignored the large number of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. The massive media publicity was naturally inseparable from the backstage promoters' efforts to fuel the flames as the main driving force behind the scenes. It is our respected King Carlo. Of course, when he first learned of the tragedy in Syria, Carlo's first reaction was that this was an opportunity, and his second reaction was that the timing was not very good point, because Italy was not completely ready. But considering that this opportunity was good, Carlo summoned his ministers to discuss it. After receiving the news, the result of the discussion was that the government believed that it could wait a while, because Italy's preparations had not yet been completed, and it was best to wait until it was completely ready before declaring war on the Ottoman Empire. The military's attitude is that, although the preparations have not yet been completed, this opportunity is too rare, and the military believes that it can declare war on the Ottomans. Especially General Saragut, who is the Minister of War, said it plausibly. Although the army's replacement has not yet been completed, our army is confident in launching a winning attack against the Ottoman army. What gave General Saragat such confidence was mainly due to the gap in weapons between the two armies. Although the Italian army is smaller in number than the Ottoman Empire, most of its army officers and soldiers have been equipped with new standard rifles, which is much better than the Ottoman army, which still uses old breech-loading guns and even some single-loading rifles. Too much point not to mention that in terms of army support firepower, the Italian army was able to defeat the Ottoman army. At present, Italian artillery is basically advanced rear-mounted retractable guns, which are not comparable to the Ottoman army, which has not even retired its front-mounted Napoleon cannons for this reason. General Saragut also assured Carlo that the Italian army would be fully equipped in 1 month, expand to 700,000 in 2 months, and reach 85 in 3 months. Thousands of people point after the Franco-Prussian War, all countries strengthened their mobilization capabilities, and although Italy's mobilization speed cannot be said to be fast, it is not slow at all. In addition, the current full strength of an Italian army division is more than 15,600 people, but in peacetime, its strength fluctuates between 8,400 and 12,100 people. An Italian army has 2 divisions, plus 1 or 2 brigades of mountain or cavalry, artillery and other supporting units. At full strength, the number can reach about 45,000 to 52,000. Therefore, the Italian army's current 10-corps structure is not low at all, and it still maintains a strength of 280,000 to 300,000 people on weekdays. Of course, in addition to Admiral Saragat, Admiral Gorek of the Navy is even more confident, because the Ottoman Empire's navy is not worth mentioning. Since the 10th Russo-Turkish War, the Ottoman navy has been locked in the Bay of Istanbul by its Sultan Abdülhamid II. In the past 5 years, the Ottoman navy has not added a ship with a tonnage of more than 1,000 tons warships, and the main force of its fleet is still the old guys who have experienced the Turkish-Russian War. Apart from being able to cooperate with the forts to guard the Black Sea Straits, what else can such a navy be used for? If they encounter them in the sea, 2 Venice-modified cruisers can defeat them. So compared to the army, the navy has no suspense at all. When the 2 admirals representing the navy and army said there was no problem, Carlo felt that this opportunity could not wait. You must know that situations like the murder of a priest are most likely to trigger public anger, because people from all over Europe basically go to church, no matter who they are. This is inevitable. The killing of innocent priests by heretics can arouse the emotions of the people even more. So after careful consideration, Carlo resolutely agreed to the military's request. After Carlo agreed, the government stopped insisting. After all, when a war breaks out, it is still up to the military to speak for itself. Although the preparations are not perfect, nothing can always go as planned. With the promotion of all parties, the murder of 2 priests in Syria caused such a sensation in Italy. Otherwise, if 2 priests were killed, there would be such a big news regarding the current outbreak of public opinion. The current intensity is not enough. He and the government need to wait until public sentiment is at its highest before taking advantage of the situation to announce actions against the Ottoman Empire. But before that, people's emotions also need to be guided. So Carlo has been in the palace these days, paying attention to the fermentation of public opinion point, but today, there was a little accident. The captain of the guard, Felicity Mitch, walked in with a telegram and a strange look on his face. "What's the matter, captain of the guard?" Looking at Feli Mickey's expression, Carlo couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, this is a telegram from the Vatican." Carlo was also surprised by the words of the captain of the guard. Then he thought again. Those old antiques were real. They were only 2 or 3 kilometers apart, and they actually needed to send telegraphs. Pull over here and let me see. Out of curiosity, Carlo wanted to see what the Vatican telegram said, and what kind of trouble Leo XIII wanted to do. As a result, when looking at the contents of the telegram, Carlo also showed a strange expression. There is no way around it. Anyone who sees someone who has always been against him suddenly changes his attitude 180 degrees will have this expression. "Ah, you sure it's from the Vatican?" "Sure, I've called to confirm." Facing the answer of the captain of the guard, Carlo was also a little confused. The content of the telegram was very ordinary. It was to thank the Italian government for its support to the servant of God and to hope that the Holy See and the Italian government could have good neighborliness and friendship. The content of this telegram is very simple and ordinary. To other countries, this would be considered nonsense at best. After this telegram came from the Vatican, this treasure was extraordinary. You must know that the telegrams sent by the Vatican before were either protests or warnings, and there were no good words anyway. So the slightly normal telegram was surprising. "I understand. Let the Prime Minister contact the Vatican and see what their thoughts are." Although Carlo didn't know what the Vatican was thinking, he tried to get in touch to see if the attitude was good, and he wouldn't lose money anyway. So, while arousing public opinion, the Italian government tried to contact the Vatican, which has always been hostile to itself. Sorry, I overestimated myself. Chapter 3 is just released now. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203. The situation worsens. The result of the contact was not good, but it seems that the Vatican's attitude is not as tough as before. They went from asking Italy to return all the confiscated church property to asking for only half, which was a huge improvement. But it is a pity that the Italian government plans not to withdraw even 1 lira, because this is related to the correctness of Italy's unification. Even if it withdraws 1 lira, it means that Italy has invaded the Vatican, which is a very troublesome matter. As for why the Vatican sent such a telegram, the reason is very simple. The Vatican cannot have the final say by the Pope alone. Some people feel that procrastinating like this is not an option, so they want to try to see if there can be one that everyone can send steps. As for why it was chosen at this time, it is also due to timing issues. If there is no response from the Italian government, the Vatican can say that this is for the 2 murdered priests, but it is a pity that the Italian government is currently very poor and has no money to give to the Vatican, so this contact ended in vain. However, this cannot be considered a failure, because at least both parties know that everyone wants to end this situation. After the Vatican episode was exposed, Italy continued to increase its momentum domestically, trying to make people's emotions even higher. The Italian actions made the Ottoman ambassador in Rome, Mansu, very worried. He sent no fewer than 5 telegrams to Halim Pasha, who was in charge of domestic diplomacy. In the letter, he described the domestic situation in Italy in detail and begged for help. Halim Pasha should come up with a solution as soon as possible. Otherwise, if this continues, war with Italy will be around the corner. Ambassador Mansu sent several urgent telegrams and finally received a response a week later. The efforts from Halim Pasha allowed the Ottoman government to come up with a solution. Speaking of which, this time it was really thanks to Halim Pasha's efforts that we were able to get such a quick response. Because in Istanbul, the Ottoman upper class had no impression of this at all. Isn't this just the death of 2 foreign missionaries? How big a deal could this be? It was just a telegram from Rome that let Ottoman officials know that this matter was unusual, but even if it was unusual, there were unusual ways to deal with it. So Ambassador Mansu received a compensation telegram. With this compensation telegram in hand, Mansu immediately hurried to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to submit Ottoman's handling opinions. Boccona took the document, which still smelled of ink, and looked at the terms listed above. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If he hadn't been determined to go to war with the Ottomans this time, the compensation would actually be quite generous. Sincerely. Of course, this is also possible. Italy's constant propaganda and hostility frightened the Ottoman senior officials, so they came up with a speechless clause in an attempt to suppress Italy's anger. This reparation document sent from Istanbul lists several items. The first item is that the Ottoman government will impose capital punishment on the murderers of the 2 missionaries and 29 principal and accomplices, including the Agali Imam. Hanging was carried out. In addition, Ottoman allocated 800,000 lire to build a larger church at the original site of the burned church. As for the name of the new church, it can be named after the 2 murdered missionaries. In addition, the Ottoman government will also provide compensation of 500,000 lire to the families of the 2 missionaries, and will also send special personnel to apologize. These 3 terms are only on the surface. In addition, privately the Ottoman government is willing to negotiate with Italy and sell a batch of goods worth 30 million lire at a low price. This can be regarded as Ottoman compensation to Italy. Of course, all this was done in private, and Osman apparently only compensated the victims. Let me say here that the Ottoman lira is much more valuable than the Italian lira. Basically, 2.4 Italian lira is exchanged for 1 Ottoman lira. If Italy were not determined to fight the Ottoman Empire this time, then this condition would be really good. It not only takes into account the face of the Italian people, but also provides benefits. It can be said to be comprehensive. But it's a pity that such a carefully prepared plan can no longer be used. After Boccona glanced at it casually, he placed it on the table. Then he took out a document and spoke. I don't need to look at your plan for now. Let's look at ours first. Boccona's words made Ambassador Mansu feel a tremble in his heart. He felt that something was very wrong. Because Boccona's words mean that Italy has no intention of solving this incident at all, or in other words, they just want to solve it in their own way. Thinking of this, Ambassador Mansu felt that the document handed over must be full of malicious intent. When he opened it, Ambassador Mansu was immediately furious. Because in his opinion, this is not a solution to the problem, it is completely the terms of Ottoman defeat. How could these Italians have the nerve to make such exorbitant demands? In addition to the issue of compensation for the 2 missionaries, the plan proposed by Italy focused on the Ottoman areas in Tripoli and Cyrenaica in East Africa and Albania. For the above mentioned areas, Italy required the Ottoman Empire to fully consider Italy's opinions when sending officials and judges, because the Italians had their own interests in the above mentioned areas. To put it simply, the appointment of officials by the Ottoman Empire in the above mentioned areas must be approved by Italy. This is not a cession of territory, but the name is more pleasant. Faced with such a shameless plan from Italy, in Mansu's view, this was completely a defeat clause, and it's the most demanding one. What gave Italy the courage to treat the Ottoman Empire like this? Although the empire has not developed enough strength in recent years, it cannot accept such humiliation. I'm sorry, but I think your country's conditions are simply unacceptable. This is not a solution, but a defeat clause. Mansu, who was very angry, expressed his opinion to Italian Foreign Minister Boccona in a righteous manner. Looking at the Ottoman ambassador in front of him, Boccona said with a smile on his face, "So what the ambassador is saying is that your country does not accept this well-intentioned plan." Boccona's words made Mansu immediately alert. As if he thought of something terrible, he immediately changed his words. "No, I can't make the final decision on this plan. It must be reported to Istanbul, so I still need to wait for a reply from the empire's high-level officials." Faced with Mansu's words, Boccona stretched out a finger and said, "We will only wait for 1 week. If your country has not received a letter after 1 week, then our country will treat it as your country's rejection, and the consequences will be your country's responsibility." Boccona's words made Mansu's veins pop. Now he knew the attitude of the Italians. "Sorry, I have to get back to the embassy." After leaving these words, Mansu flew out of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. After riding a carriage back to the embassy, Mansu truthfully sent Italy's request back to Istanbul, and then also sent back his understanding of the situation. "Dear Halim Pasha, I have a very urgent situation to inform you. This missionary incident has given the Italians an opportunity. They want the empire's territories in East Africa and Albania, and they are in conflict with their foreign minister Pasha." During the meeting in Kanat, the Italian foreign minister did not hide their intentions at all. "I think Italy is already preparing for war with the empire, so I also ask the distinguished Halim Pasha to inform the distinguished Sultan that the Italians there is going to be a war with our country." At the end of this telegram, Mansu used the word war, which I believe will make the empire prepared. Chapter 204 Ottoman Countermeasures. The Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul is the residence of Abdülhamid II, the current Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Although it is not big, only more than 600 meters, the interior of the palace is extremely luxurious. In order to build Dolmabahce Palace, the Ottoman Empire invested a lot of money and owed a large amount of foreign debt for this purpose. It is said that a total of 14 tons of gold and 40 tons of silver were used to decorate the entire palace. Therefore, after the palace was built, the Sultan chose this place as his residence. Of course, Abdülhamid II also chose to sit here, but compared with the previous Sultan, Abdülhamid II seemed to live in seclusion here, and could not easily see the Ottoman the monarch of the empire. But this time, the threat from Italy made Hamid II appear in front of everyone again. The news sent back from Rome is that Italy wants to use the murder of missionaries in Syria to launch a war against our country. In the palace, in front of the Sultan and other important ministers, Halim Pasha, who was in charge of diplomacy, told the contents of this discussion. "Halim, is this news accurate?" The questioner was the Ottoman Grand Vizier Kamal Pasha. The Grand Vizier is equivalent to the position of Prime Minister, just called by a different name. The news is very accurate. This is a telegram sent by the ambassador to Rome, Mansu. In addition, I also sent someone to inquire about it. Currently, Italy is spreading bad news about our country. In addition, from our international friends, we also learned that Italy news that the army has cancelled vacations and begun mobilizing retired officers and soldiers. And Italy sent news in the European debt market that they will issue a huge bond. As Halim Pasha spoke about the current situation in Italy, everyone present looked unhappy. "We are all people who have been in politics for a long time, and we still can't figure out what the Italians want to do." As for the international friends Halim Pasha mentioned, no one can have more than 3 or 5 close friends. So, when Halim Pasha finished speaking, Kamal Pasha, the Grand Vizier, stood up. "The current situation is already obvious. The Italians' hostile attitude towards our country is very clear. They can't wait to seize North Africa and Albania from the empire. In this regard, our country must not let the Italians succeed in their attempts." Just as Grand Vizier Kamal Pasha was speaking, a loud bell-like voice sounded. "They can't even imagine that His Majesty the Sultan's army will let these Italians know what wishful thinking is." The speaker was the Minister of War, Field Marshal Osman Nuri Pasha of the Ottoman Empire, and the veteran expressed his attitude angrily. This was one of the few famous generals in the Ottoman Empire. In the 10th Turkish-Russian War, he led an army of the Ottoman Empire to hold off the Russian coalition's 300,000 troops in Pleven for 5 months. If it were not for the ammunition, even though food and grass were running low, he could still hold on. However, his subsequent failed breakout and capture made him less than perfect in the Turkish-Russian War. But despite this, after returning to the Ottoman Empire at the end of the war, Nuri Pasha was still warmly welcomed, and Sultan Hamid II personally hosted a welcome ceremony for him. This also shows his status in the eyes of the Sultan. This is his second time serving as Minister of War. Faced with the threat of war in Italy, the old commander stepped forward without hesitation to lead the Ottoman army onto the battlefield again. Although the words of the Minister of War were inspiring, Kamal Pasha still had something to say. "Marshal Nuri Pasha, I can understand your mood. I'm as angry as you. But it is not easy for the empire to fight a war. Why? Did Kemal Pasha say this because the Ottoman Empire's treasury is empty and currently cannot even get out 5 million Ottoman lira? Speaking of which, the Ottoman Empire was not weaker than Italy in terms of population and economy. Logically speaking, its fiscal revenue should be very good. Unfortunately, Kemal Pasha, as Grand Vizier, knows best that the Ottoman Empire is currently heavily in debt, local finances are in a mess, and officials are very corrupt. For every lira turned over to the treasury, at least 5 or 6 lira have been stolen. These officials put it in their pockets. This also resulted in the Ottoman government's income being far less than that of the European powers. In addition, His Majesty the Sultan had to live a decent life, so there was less money to distribute. In addition, the Ottomans borrowed a lot from foreign countries, all of which must be repaid. In addition, after deducting 7,788 expenses, the Ottoman Empire had a deficit of nearly 100 million Ottoman liras every year. You must know that, although Italy's annual deficit is higher than that of the Ottomans, it is because of large-scale construction and the advancement of its own industrialization. The Ottomans have lost these two huge expenditures, but still have such a high deficit. You can imagine how bad the Ottoman finances are. Faced with such a situation, how could Kemal Pasha, the Grand Vizier, dare to start a war? After all, once a war started, it would require massive financial support. And in Osman's situation, where can he find these funds? Then, let's borrow money from other countries. We can't give up these two territories to the Italians, just because we are short of money. As for Kemal Pasha saying that he had no money, Nuri Pasha would certainly not care about the government's financial problems. He is the Minister of War, not the Grand Vizier. Hearing the words of the Minister of War, Kemal Pasha didn't know what to say. It's not that easy to borrow money. Who would lend the Ottomans a large sum of money without agreeing to some additional conditions? You must know that this requires at least 500 million lire. This is what Kemal Pasha made, based on the last Turkish-Russian war. Made a preliminary estimate. If you want to borrow money now, it's not easy to borrow such a large amount of money, but now Italy is close to declaring war. I also know that borrowing money is not that easy, as the atmosphere at the scene became more and more intense. The two of them were almost on the verge of a fight. Okay, everyone, calm down. This time it was His Majesty the Sultan who spoke, and his words brought an end to the argument between the two. We cannot just ignore the Italians' war threat. We are immediately ready to mobilize the army. We will also look to Britain and France to purchase weapons. For borrowing issues, we can look to a few more countries. With Hamid II's words, the Ottoman Empire's next move was also destined, as you command, Your Majesty, as commanded. After Hamid II was satisfied that everyone present listened to him respectfully, he spoke again. In addition, we cannot give up on diplomacy. In addition to Britain, France, and Germany, other countries are also seeking support, just like the last war. Although Hamid II stopped talking, everyone present knew that the Sultan was talking about the 10th Turkish-Russian War, which caused the Ottomans to completely decline. Thanks to excellent diplomacy, the Ottomans were able to retain some of their Balkan territories. In fact, this is not a good example at all, but the diplomatic work that time was indeed outstanding. Following Hamid II's words, the Ottoman Empire also started its own actions. First, the army began to mobilize to prepare for the war. The other was to borrow money urgently. Although this would definitely cost someone a fortune, they could not care about it at this time. So many. In addition, diplomatic work for various countries is also a top priority for Ottoman. Chapter 205 Diplomatic War. Our country is full of sympathy for what your country is going through. In Paris, the new French Prime Minister Charles de Frezin was talking to Ambassador Ottoman about France's attitude in his office. Your Excellency, Prime Minister, thank you for France's concern for our country. I wonder if our country's request for your country's help has resulted in any results. The Ottoman ambassador to Paris was eager to know France's attitude as soon as he arrived. Faced with the ambassador's question, Frezin smiled. Our country has always attached great importance to the friendly relations between the two countries. So if your country wants to issue bonds, you can definitely get the support of the Paris banking group. In addition, our country has a number of decommissioned weapons and equipment that can also be sold to you. but in terms of price, it is. Having said this, how could the Ottoman ambassador still understand that it would be good to be able to buy weapons and ammunition at this time, and there is no need to care too much about the price? I understand. Please rest assured that Osman will pay a suitable price for these weapons, since the Ottomans are on the road like this. Frezin doesn't mind selling them some other weapons. As for our country's latest torpedo boat, it is a powerful weapon to protect the coast from enemy attacks. I wonder if your country is interested. Every Ottoman can feel your country's goodwill, but this matter needs to be decided by Istanbul, so please don't be offended. Prime Minister. Faced with the French Prime Minister's kindness, Ambassador Osman could not make up his mind, because he could not make the final decision on the matter, and could only report it first. Of course, he is still very satisfied with France's attitude. This is really a traditional good ally. It's okay. I look forward to your good news. After seeing off the Ottomans, Frezin smiled. This time Osman asked for help, but he was given a chance. France's encounter in the Far East a few years ago is still fresh in every French person's memory. One more thing to say here is that after the Sino-French War, in order to save some face for themselves, both the French army in the Far East and officials in Paris claimed that it was Italian help that caused France's defeat in the Far East. This has caused Italy's perception in the hearts of the French people to plummet, and has also affected the economic and trade relations between the two countries. Of course, it is understandable for the French to say this. After all, which one is more acceptable, whether it is to be beaten up by the despised yellow-skinned people or to be tricked by Italy, which is also a great power? There is no need to consider it. And now that the situation is changing, if we don't help Osman severely when we get to France, we will be sorry for the opportunity given by God. If it weren't for the fact that the Mediterranean is too small and too close to European countries to handle relations, it would be possible for the French Navy to form an Ottoman ocean-going fleet. However, the Navy cannot move, but the army can still do so. Let the Ottomans purchase a large amount of arms first. If the effect is good, then the French Army Advisory Group can be formed. The attitude of the French made the Ottoman Empire very satisfied. But in other countries, it's hard to say. I'm sorry, our country cannot directly help your country in this matter. Although the relationship between you and us is very good, the agreement between our country and your country is only for Russia, and does not involve other countries. At number 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister Cecil, who is also the Foreign Secretary, spoke with regret to the Ottoman ambassador in London about the British decision. Faced with Prime Minister Cecil's words, the Ottoman ambassador was not willing to give up just like that. Your Excellency Prime Minister, Italy's actions seriously threaten the security of the Eastern Mediterranean. As the arbiter of the region, is the British government just watching them unscrupulously destroy order in the region? Although the Ottoman ambassador praised the British very highly, Prime Minister Cecil was someone who could not be stimulated by these words. I'm sorry, my country can't help your country. But if your country wants to issue debt, the gentlemen in London are still willing to make a small contribution. The British refused and the ambassador left in disappointment. I'm sorry, but our country cannot sell your country's weapons at this time, because it will expose Germany to moral accusations. In addition, your country's plan to borrow money from our country, I'm sorry, is also based on the previous reason, and our country cannot support your country. In the Prime Minister's office in Berlin, although Bismarck was somewhat exhausted physically and mentally when facing the Ottoman ambassador in Berlin, the iron-blooded Prime Minister still fulfilled his obligations of secret alliance. Your Excellency Prime Minister, why did you reject our country's request? You must know that our country has always respected your country very much. I hope that taking into account the relationship between our two countries, your country can consider it carefully. The Ottoman ambassador, who was completely unaware of the secret alliance of the three countries, still tried to change Germany's attitude. Faced with the attempts of the Ottoman ambassador to Berlin, Bismarck rejected him without hesitation. I'm sorry, our country has already considered it carefully. The conflict between your country and Italy still needs to be resolved by peaceful means, which can prevent the people in the region from suffering losses. If France is considered satisfactory and Britain and Germany are disappointed. Then Ottoman's diplomatic behavior in Austria-Hungary is really desperate. Our country is very concerned about the dispute between your country and Italy. In addition, considering that a war may break out between your two countries, our country hopes that your country can transfer the Bosnia and Herzegovina region to our country. This can prevent the people in the region from being threatened by war. Of course, our country does not want to threaten your country. Our country is still very sincere and is willing to spend £2 million to purchase this area. The words of Count Gustav Karnacki, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister and chairman of the Council of Ministers, gave the Ottoman ambassador in Vienna a chill. What is the difference between Austria-Hungary's method and taking advantage of the situation? Although Bosnia and Herzegovina is currently under the administration of Austria-Hungary, £2 million requires Osman to legally abandon Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is very embarrassing for his ambassador to Vienna. I'm sorry, I can't give an answer to this matter at all, because it is beyond the scope of my responsibilities. It was obvious that the ambassador did not want to talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina with Austria-Hungary. It's just that he doesn't want to talk about this issue. Count Karnacki said slowly, Your Excellency, the ambassador can report to your country first, but our country's patience is limited. I hope that your country will give you a clear answer within half a month. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be eager military officers who will expel all your officials in the area. Leave the country. This was already a naked threat, and in the face of such a threat, the Ottoman ambassador to Vienna jumped out like a frightened rabbit. The ambassador in Vienna, as soon as he returned to the embassy, immediately sent back the news that Austria-Hungary wanted Bosnia and Herzegovina. What to do next can only wait for Istanbul's decision. While Ottoman was making diplomatic efforts, Italy was not idle either. However, unlike Ottoman, Italy's chosen target was somewhat unexpected. Chapter 206 Balkan Allies. If there is anything that deserves the most attention in Europe recently, it is the dispute between Italy and the Ottomans. In the face of disputes involving neighboring countries, Bulgaria is extremely concerned about it, because it is very important to Bulgaria. The same goes for Stefan Stambolov, Prime Minister of Bulgaria. But today, the hard-working Prime Minister did not go to the Prime Minister's office to work. Instead, he wanted to rest at home for a day on the grounds that he was a little tired. Bulgarian officials didn't think much about the Prime Minister's break. No one is made by a machine. As long as power is added, he can keep working. But this time, Prime Minister Stambolov's rest was fake, because a very important guest came to his residence, and because of the guest's arrival, he carefully chose to take a day off as a cover-up. Which guest is so important that Stambolov, as Prime Minister, needs to cover for him. The guest once again came to the Prime Minister's home, accompanied by Toledo, the Italian ambassador to Bulgaria. Hello, Mr. Mayor. This time Stambolov could not be mistaken, and then he greeted Ambassador Toledo. After saying hello, both sides sat down, which also announced the beginning of the negotiation. I didn't expect Mr. Mayor to be so hidden. I didn't notice it during our last visit. Faced with Stambolov's words, Mayor spoke with a hint of apology. I'm sorry, because the stakes are so high that I have to do this. I also hope that Prime Minister Stambolov will not blame him. Now I would like to solemnly introduce myself, Italy's secret envoy Yasinimir. So, what is the mission of the special envoy? Find allies who can help each other. Although there had been speculation before, Mayor's answer still made Stambolov feel a little excited. He is very clear about the current dispute between Italy and the Ottomans. Italy is obviously seeking trouble. Since Italy dares to do this, it means that it has been prepared. And this time, when the Italians found Bulgaria, it must be about this matter. Sure enough, his guess was correct. I wonder if your country thinks our country can become an ally. Faced with the words of the Bulgarian Prime Minister in front of him, Mayor said with a smile, this requires whether our two countries can reach a consensus. Mayor's words make it clear that whether cooperation can be achieved this time depends on whether the two countries can reach an agreement. Of course, Stambolov also knows that Italy is currently in a strong position in the negotiations between the two countries, which can also be seen in terms of the status and national strength of the two countries. Even so, Stambolov was not in a hurry. Now that the Italians have found Bulgaria, it means that he must have something that the other party likes without letting him wait any longer. He heard Mayor continue. Ottoman is an opponent to both of our countries. Do you agree with this? Although Stambolov is currently implementing a pro-Ottoman policy, he also notes that this is just a stopgap measure for Bulgaria. If it weren't for blocking Russian pressure, who would get close to this country that has dominated the Bulgarians for hundreds of years? You must know that the Greater Bulgaria claimed by Bulgaria includes all of Macedonia and most of Thrace. If you want Bulgaria to give up its dream, it will not work even if God comes. Yes, Osman is a strong opponent for us. At this time, Stambolov had already forgotten about the friendship between Bulgaria and Bulgaria that he preached, because he knew that the Italians would definitely pay generous rewards to win over Bulgaria. Sure enough, he was right. After hearing his words, Italian envoy Mayor continued. Now that we have a common enemy, we can work together sincerely to make the Ottomans pay the price for their arrogance. I wonder if Prime Minister Stambolov recognizes this. In response to Mayor's question, Stambolov nodded. I very much agree with this. However, the Bulgarian people also agree that they must see something practical. Mr. Mayor, you know what I say. Obviously, Stambolov is also a master who does not let the hawk see the rabbit, and he wants to see the conditions in Italy first. This is not to blame for his stinginess. Unlike Italy, Bulgaria has a small family. If it turns against the Ottoman Empire this time and cannot get enough benefits, Bulgaria's situation will be even more difficult. So it is normal to be cautious faced with Stambolov's little thoughts. Mayor did not care. Instead, he took out a map of the Balkans and spread it out in front of the three of them. How many areas can be obtained depends on the scale of your country's troop dispatch. If your country can dispatch 100,000 troops, then our country can help your country obtain North Macedonia. Of course, if it can dispatch 150,000 troops, then Central Macedonia will be. It's not impossible to fight for your country. Mayor's words made Stambolov breathe heavier, because this condition is really generous. You must know that Bulgaria currently only has an area of more than 90,000 square kilometers, and the Northern Macedonia region alone has more than 15,000 square kilometers. If Central Macedonia is included, it will be enough to reach 30,000 square kilometers. Of course, you have to be obedient. What Mayor said about striving for it means that you may not be able to get it. Of course, you can't get it all. You can also share it in half. This will not only expand Bulgaria's territory by 1/3, but also enhance Bulgaria's national strength. Of course, to get such a huge reward, this will also mean that Bulgaria needs to use its full strength. There are currently only 3.3 million people in Bulgaria, and mobilizing 150,000 people to participate in the war will mean that Bulgaria needs nationwide mobilization. Because sending 150,000 troops is only a mandatory requirement, and Bulgaria also needs to retain people to protect its homeland. In addition, in terms of logistics, transportation and other aspects, Bulgaria is basically a nationwide mobilization. Of course, it is necessary to get such a reward for such a big effort. Although Stambolov was very satisfied with the conditions offered by the Italians, people's desires are endless, so he still wanted to fight for it. Your country's return for Bulgaria's 150,000 troops is somewhat vague, which is difficult for our country to accept. It is obvious that Prime Minister Stambolov hopes to get Central Macedonia. Facing the appetite of the Bulgarians, Mayor smiled slightly. I'm sorry, this is the biggest reward our country can give. Considering your country's reputation for bravery and fighting in the Balkans, that's why we give so much. If your country is not satisfied, then our country will consider other options. You know there are many people who want to benefit from the Ottomans. Our country has considered it carefully. Your suggestions are very pertinent and our country is very satisfied. Faced with Mayor's verbal threat, Stambolov immediately changed his attitude 180 degrees, because he did not dare to gamble. As far as he knew, not many people were currently eyeing Ottoman territory. Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, all had ideas about Ottoman territory. As long as Italy offers similar conditions, other countries except Austria-Hungary will take the lead. How dare he gamble? If Italy turns around and leaves, he will become Bulgaria's eternal sinner. Well, the conditions offered by Italy this time are indeed very generous. There are many people in Italy who understand and criticize this because it seems to show the generosity of Italy. But these people didn't dare to say it because it was the wise King Carlo who made this plan. Why His Majesty Carlo offered such a generous reward depends on what he thinks. But no matter how you think about it, this does not affect Carlo's status at all. Of course, there are other ways in this, only Carlo knows, but thanks to His Majesty Carlo's decision, Mayor had enough confidence to make Bulgaria obey, otherwise he would find someone else. That's why Stamboliv immediately retracted what he said, after testing it out, not daring to make any mistakes. Now that Stamboliv agreed, the next step is to talk about the issue of Bulgaria sending troops. Mayor pointed at the map and said, according to our country's plan, our country will launch a landing operation in the Albanian region to attract the Ottoman army. At that time, your country will send troops to penetrate directly into the Macedonian area behind them and annihilate them. Your and our armies threaten Istanbul. Let the Ottoman Empire accept our terms. The plan mentioned by Mayor is the basic plan made by the Italian army to fight in the Balkans. Of course, this includes Bulgaria. In addition, the Italian army has also made corresponding combat plans including Greece, Serbia and other countries participating in the war, so Italy is not limited to Bulgaria, but any other country. It's just that it will be faster to defeat the Ottoman army by pulling in Bulgaria. After hearing Mayor's plan, Stamboliv looked at the map thoughtfully. At first glance, it was clear that this plan was about surprise. Of course, he had to admit that this battle plan was very good. If he were an Ottoman and was suddenly attacked from behind while fighting the Italian army, the outcome would have been doomed. Since the plan was good, there was nothing to hesitate about, and Stamboliv immediately planned to agree. But he suddenly thought about something which made him want to agree, but he swallowed it when it reached his lips. Special Envoy Mir, your plan is perfect, and our country is very willing to join. However, our country has a little difficulty, and I hope to get your help. The Bulgarian Prime Minister suddenly came up with something. Mayor was not impatient at all and asked politely, Prime Minister Stamboliv, what is it? If our country can help you, you might as well say so. In response to Mayor's inquiry, Stamboliv immediately spoke, it's like this. Our country's ordnance is somewhat insufficient. If we want to mobilize 150,000 troops to participate in the war, we need some help from your country. Mayor did not reject Stambolov's idea of asking Italy to provide some equipment, because helping Bulgaria at this time was helping Italy. Please rest assured, Prime Minister, our country will not be stingy with its allies. I wonder how much armament your country wants. When asked by Mayor, Stambolov revealed a number. Our country needs weapons and equipment for 80,000 people, because currently our country can only equip 100,000 people including its inventory of weapons. What? After hearing Stambolov's words, Mayor screamed in surprise. Because equipping 80,000 people with weapons is not a small amount. If Italy takes out so many, it will definitely affect its domestic war preparations. Seeing Mayor's surprised expression, Stambolov didn't want to do this either. It's just that Bulgaria can only come up with equipment to arm 100,000 people. If it has more, it will only have muzzle-loading guns to press the warehouse. This thing definitely cannot be used to deal with the Ottoman army. Sorry, I also know that our country's request is a bit excessive, but our country's equipment gap is too large, so we can only ask for help from your country. Faced with Stambolov's almost pleading gesture, Mayor thought for a moment and replied, I need to send a telegram to Rome. I believe that we will give your country a batch of weapons. As for how much, Rome needs to decide. You ask for too much, and I can't make the decision at all. As for Mayor, Stambolov also knew that this matter was not an easy decision to make. It doesn't matter, we can wait, but our country does not want to change the previously negotiated conditions. Don't worry about this. As long as your country does not refuse, we are unanimous in dealing with the Ottomans. Then, the two skipped the topic of ordnance and talked about how he commanded, contacted, and coordinated, with a single-minded intention, to cut flesh from Osman. A consensus was quickly reached on this proposal point. The talks between the two parties lasted until late at night, and finally they basically reached an agreement point after the negotiations were concluded. Mayor and Ambassador Toledo rushed back to the embassy overnight point. As soon as he returned to the embassy, he sent the Bulgarians' request for ordnance back to Rome point. Then they each dragged their tired bodies back to the room and waited for Oman's reply point. While they were waiting for news from Rome, a negotiated agreement was also sent back to Rome. That's right, in addition to Bulgaria, Italy has also found an ally, Montenegro point. Don't be surprised if Italy turns to Montenegrins as allies. Although this small country of less than 10,000 square kilometers looks small, but the people in the country had a deep-seated hatred of the Ottomans. The country was originally a communist country, and the monarch was a Catholic bishop who combined political and religious rights. After 1851, it transformed into a secular country. Religiously speaking, the Montenegrins are very unfriendly to the Ottomans. In addition, they are the only country in the Balkans that has not been conquered by the Ottomans. Although it occupies a difficult terrain, it is also one of the reasons for its bravery and skill in fighting against the Ottomans. In addition, Montenegro has gained benefits every time it fought against the Ottomans. Its territory has expanded from less than 2,000 square kilometers at the beginning to nearly 10,000 square kilometers now. It gives people the feeling of being an invincible Ziokiang point. This time, Italy attracted the Montenegrins because of their hatred of the Ottomans and asked them to play a vanguard role. So facing Italy's olive branch, how could Montenegro be unwilling to accept it? Its monarch, Grand Duke Nicholas I, even negotiated terms with Italy as soon as possible. So Montenegro also got into the Italian chariot with Bulgaria and Montenegro. Italy is at least as strong as the Ottoman Empire in terms of military strength in the Balkans. Coupled with factors such as equipment, training, and morale, it can be said that Italy has already had the upper hand. Next, we need the performance of the two countries on the battlefield 2-in-1. No splitting, just look at it this way. Chapter 207 Ultimatum. Although both Italy and the Ottomans are wooing allies, this does not affect the two countries' preparations for war at all. Although some people called for a peaceful resolution between the two countries, anyone with a discerning eye can see that war between the two countries is inevitable. Of course, Italy is more proactive in this because Italy's preparations began 2 years ago. As for the Ottoman Empire, they could only seize the time to prepare for war as soon as possible. Fortunately, the help from French friends made the Ottoman Empire much better. The urgently shipped weapons and equipment were a timely help to the Ottoman army. The weapons sent by the French were very good, and the grass rifle modified from the Chasipo rifle had very good performance, and was also liked by the Ottoman military. Of course, it also has some of its new 1886 style level rifles, but the number is too small, only a few thousand, which are equipped among the elite troops. However, although the Ottomans obtained a batch of French equipment, the senior officials in Istanbul at the time knew that the Ottomans were still not ready, so they tried to delay the war. As a key figure, Ambassador to Rome Actor Mohammed Mansour frequently visited Italian officials. In addition, he also accepted interviews with Italian media, claiming that the Ottoman government attached great importance to the teaching plan in Syria and would definitely be strict. Deal with those thugs. It's just that Ambassador Mansour's performance has long been known to the Italian high-level officials. This is just a stopgap measure by the Ottoman Empire to try to delay the outbreak of war so that the Ottoman Empire can be more prepared. Now that we have an insight into the Ottoman Empire's intentions, we will not let it succeed. So, while the Ottoman Empire was still preparing for war, Foreign Minister Bacona summoned Ambassador Mansour, who was the latest to appear frequently in Rome. After the 7-day period arrived, Ambassador Mansour, how would your country respond to our request? Faced with Bacona's words, Mansour, who is the ambassador to Rome, immediately replied, "Please give our country some time. Your country's conditions are a bit demanding. Our country needs to hold a meeting to discuss before we can give a reply." Facing The ambassador, Boccona, certainly knew what the other party was planning, but he did not intend to give the other party a chance, and Italian roots could not afford to give him this opportunity. So it took out a new document and spoke. This is our country's ultimatum, and your country is given a reply within 48 hours. This flimsy document seemed to Mansu like a reminder, and he did not dare to accept it. I'm sorry, your country's request is still under negotiation. Can you give us some time to consider it? Faced with Mansu's words, Boccona couldn't help laughing. Then he stopped smiling and stared at the Ottoman ambassador in front of him. Whether your country regards our country as a fool, your country's domestic actions do not seem to be considering it at all. Your country's military is even mobilizing. Does this show that you are already preparing for armed confrontation? Of course, Mansu, as the ambassador, would not acknowledge Boccona's words. Your country's reaction is too extreme. This is just our country's normal response to this matter. The conditions given by your country are simply difficult for people to agree to directly. Do you still want to interfere with our country's internal affairs? Although Mansu's words sound reasonable, Boccona is not a vegetarian. No matter how much your envoy wants to quibble and find excuses, he will not let our country stop. Therefore, your envoy had better read this ultimatum. It is now 1400 hours on March 2nd, 1890, 2 days later. If our country has not received a reply from your country at this time, it means that your country has rejected our request. Then we are very sorry, and our country will use all means to safeguard its interests. After finishing speaking, Boccona did not wait for Mansu's answer and left the living room directly, leaving only the ambassador and the ultimatum that had fallen on the ground, or it would be more appropriate to call it an ultimatum point. After seeing that he was the only one left, Mansu quickly picked up the ultimatum. The content was not much different from the last time, except that the reply was limited to 48 hours. Also, at the end, if the Ottoman Empire exceeds the time limit, this means that Italy will be at war with the Ottoman Empire. This time, the Italian government did not use any cover-up words at all, and directly stated the threat of war nakedly. Mansu, who knew the seriousness of the matter, did not stop thinking at all. After picking up the ultimatum, he immediately walked out the door quickly. He now needs to rush back to the embassy to break the news to Istanbul. As for the people of Italy, they also felt the atmosphere of coming war. In the evening of that day, major newspapers published evening editions one after another, which were full of the evil deeds of the Ottoman Empire, especially the murder case of the 2 missionaries in Zabadani, which was directly stated to be under the instigation of the Ottoman Empire. Because the persecution of Catholics in the country has never stopped. As a Catholic country, Italy has the obligation to let the Ottomans know that the majesty of God cannot be insulted. Major newspapers issued such news at the same time, and anyone with a basic sense of smell could feel that the situation had changed. What's more, on that day, the Italian people broke out in the largest anti-Ottoman demonstration in history. Especially in the capital city of Rome, the number of participants reached nearly 200,000. These people came to the Ottoman embassy in Rome in large numbers and colored the embassy with their own colors. If it weren't for the police's desperate interception, these people might have demolished the embassy. All this was also seen by other ambassadors who were observing the situation. Among them, Fulham, the British ambassador to Italy, wrote in a report to London. The development of the situation in Italy has shown that this country is ready to go to war with the Ottomans. They are already impatient to show their elegance to the Ottomans. In this regard, the imperial government needs to have its own prepare to prevent an overconfident performance from Italy. This ambassador, who has been in Rome for nearly 10 years, can be said to be an Italian expert. He has certain concerns about Italy's development in recent years, so he has repeatedly hinted to London to pay attention to Italy's actions. However, since Italy is currently very low in the British Empire's attention, Fulham's report is basically shelved. Because the British Empire is currently paying more attention to France, Russia, Germany and other countries. Otherwise, it is better to develop colonies than to focus on Italy. But in any case, the ultimatum from Italy has been sent, and we are waiting for the Ottoman Empire's reply. Chapter 208 War begins. The ultimatum from Italy is a big deal for Istanbul. Although the Ottomans had already decided to fight Italy when Italy sent the ultimatum, it was still very shocking news for senior officials in Istanbul. Of course, now for them, facing Italy's ultimatum, they need to consider the outbreak of war. So this time His Majesty the Sultan held a meeting, and the focus of his discussion was not an Italian ultimatum at all. Halim Pasha, can other countries still fight for it? Still. In the new palace of Dalmabas, and in a meeting personally chaired by His Majesty Sultan Hamid, Kamil Pasha, the Grand Vizier, questioned Halim Pasha, who was in charge of diplomacy. Although both are government officials, the efficiency of the diplomatic department this time was too low and the activities lasted so long. Except for winning the support of France, other countries stood aside. And what's worse is that some countries are trying to take advantage of the situation. If this is not a failure of the foreign ministry, is it a failure of the entire government? Facing the Grand Vizier's question, Halim Pasha could not speak because there was really no way to explain the matter. But after all, some words are still needed, so Halim Pasha thought about it for a while and then spoke. As for other countries, Germany and Austria don't need to consider it at the moment. The only ones that can still fight for it are Britain and Russia. Having said this, Halim Pasha secretly looked at the people present. But it didn't look like the situation was very good. Facing him, the important ministers including the Sultan frowned. The reason for their frowns was very clear to Halim Pasha. He mentioned Russia. Regarding the grievances between the Ottomans and Russia, I could not finish them in 3 days and 3 nights. Halim Pasha, tell me what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs think. Maybe they will have some good ideas. The words of Grand Vizier Kamil Pasha broke the atmosphere of the scene and relieved him. Halim Pasha cast a grateful look at the Grand Vizier and continued. Currently, the only countries our country can win over are Britain and Russia. As long as we have the support of these two countries, it will be of great help to our country's war against Italy. What Halim Pasha meant in his words was to seek help from Russia. However, considering the current emotions and opinions in the Ottoman Empire, Britain had to be added as a cover. In Halim Pasha's view, although Russia is eyeing Istanbul, this will also mean that the Russians do not want other countries to have inappropriate thoughts about it, and the Ottoman Empire can take advantage of Russia's attitude to benefit itself. Not to mention anything else, as long as Russia sends some ordnance, it will be a huge help. Of course, the intensity must be controlled well, otherwise 10,000 British and French people will think that the Ottoman Empire has turned to Russia, which will be really troublesome. After Halim Pasha finished speaking, there was silence as everyone pondered the meaning of his words. Halim Pasha, your proposal is very good, but considering our country's relationship with Russia, we should focus our main diplomatic goals on our British friends. This time it was His Majesty the Sultan who answered him. It was obvious that His Majesty the Sultan was not willing to accept Halim Pasha's idea of seeking help from Russia. Following Sultan's words, everyone present secretly breathed a sigh of relief. This result was considered the best. It not only prevented them from expressing their opinions, but also solved this problem. But no one noticed the trace of unwillingness flashing in Halim Pasha's eyes. However, in addition to seeking support from Britain and Russia, the Ottomans also have an urgent problem that needs to be solved, and that is the issue of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The telegrams sent from Vienna reached double digits, and they all required Istanbul to make a decision on how to respond to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Regarding the telegram sent by the Vienna ambassador, the Ottoman Empire's ministers were also a little helpless. Refuse, because I'm afraid that the Austro-Hungarian Empire will do it on its own, and then the whole empire will not look good. Agree, this makes Osman lose face again. So before this, Istanbul always adopted a drag and drop formula. But now it can't be delayed anymore. The Vienna ambassador's telegrams are becoming more and more frequent, which also means that the patience of the Austro-Hungarians is about to be exhausted. So taking this opportunity, Halim Pasha raised questions about Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, regarding the question that Austria-Hungary wants our country to transfer the suzerainty of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I don't know how to reply. Facing another question raised by Halim Pasha, the ministers present were even more speechless. The reason is simple. At present, the Ottoman Empire only has nominal suzerainty in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the rest is managed by Austria-Hungary. This is actually a question of one sentence, but this sentence hurt Osman no less, so this problem has now reached the point where it must be solved. What are the current conditions for Austrians? The person who asked this question was Grand Vizier Kamil Pasha. Facing the head of government of the Ottoman Empire, Halim Pasha could only answer truthfully. At present, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is willing to give £2.4 million as compensation. According to the report of our ambassador in Vienna, the Austrians are already a little impatient. Their head of government, Count Karlacki, has said that, if our country continues to refuse to agree, they will handle it themselves. Bosnia and Herzegovina will no longer talk to our country. Halim Pasha's words silenced the scene for a moment, and even the toughest minister of war, Nuri Pasha, fell silent. The field marshal was not a fool. If he shouted his objections at this time, there would be no good fruits to be gained. On the contrary, it might lead to the possible intervention of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When the time comes to face the pressure of war between Italy and Austria, even a fool knows that it is impossible to win. Not to mention the possibility of triggering a chain reaction throughout the Balkan Peninsula. Countries such as Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria are eyeing the Ottoman Empire's territory in the Balkan Peninsula. Whether Istanbul can be saved by then is a question. Therefore, at this time, you must not speak at will. This time, the atmosphere at the scene became more solemn, and the scene of silence reappeared. Looking at the performance of the ministers in the hall, Abdulhamid II, as the Sultan, felt a little excited. Needless to say, he knew that these people were waiting for him to make a decision. When he thought of leaving any problems that these people could not solve to him, Hamid II had the idea of replacing all the people in front of him. But this kind of thought is just a thought. If he really does this, no one will handle the affairs of the empire for him. Although he couldn't replace them, as the Sultan, he could still give them a small punishment. So he pointed his finger at Kamil Pasha, the Grand Vizier, and asked, "My Grand Vizier, what do you think should be done about this matter?" Faced with the Sultan naming the problem to him, Kamil Pasha changed slightly, but under the Sultan's attention, he could only bite the bullet and speak. "Your Majesty, I think it would be best to talk." Kamil Pasha's words made the Sultan furious. "Why are you saying this again? Just tell me from the Chamber of Commerce that you want to talk. Now the Austrians almost don't want to talk, and you still want to talk." Facing His Majesty the Sultan's anger, Kamil Pasha sweated on his forehead. He knew that the Sultan was angry and had no other choice but to meet his demands, so he could only defend himself. "Your Majesty, the last talk was to squeeze more conditions from the Austrians, so no goal was set, but this time it is different. I will send a telegram to the Vienna ambassador to agree to Austria-Hungary's conditions in due course." After seeing that the Grand Vizier assumed his due responsibilities, Abdulhamid II turned his attention to other people. "What the Grand Vizier said is very good. I have no objection." "I don't have any objection either." The answers came one after another, allowing Kamil Pasha to take on this responsibility. After solving this problem, the meeting continued, but many people looked at Foreign Minister Halim Pasha frequently, fearing that he would raise problems again. Halim Pasha, who was being watched, could only smile bitterly. If he didn't mention this issue, should he just pretend it never happened? After solving these two problems, things got better next, because the talk was about preparations for war, which gave the main role to the Minister of War Osman Nuri Pasha. The army secretary went on to talk about several existing problems of the army, such as insufficient supplies, insufficient ammunition stocks, training of officers and soldiers, and mobilization of troops. However, the Secretary of War's problems are much easier for the government to solve. Most of these problems can be solved with money. At present, the war bonds issued by the Ottomans in Britain, France and other countries are pretty good, so the Ottoman finances are quite comfortable. Time was lost in such discussions, and the 2 days given by Italy passed by in this situation. Istanbul certainly did not forget the threat from Italy. Less than 3 hours before the final time, a telegram was sent to the ambassador in Rome, Actor Mohammed Mansour. Looking at the telegram in his hand, Mansour didn't feel comfortable at all, even though he had been prepared for it. but the order from Istanbul left him no choice point. But before preparing to go out, he had ordered the embassy to burn confidential documents immediately and prepare luggage, because they would not be able to stay a long point. When he arrived at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, its Foreign Minister Gemini Boccona was already waiting here. He looked at his pocket watch. Very good, there are still 45 minutes left. I want to know what your attitude is when you bring your country faced with Boccona's words. Mansu, who was expressionless, nodded slightly and spoke. Our country will never agree to your country's unreasonable demands. This is our country's answer. After finishing speaking, he took out the formal reply message from Istanbul and handed it over after receiving the message from the ambassador. Boccona glanced at it and put it aside. Then he took out a declaration of war that he had prepared and handed it to Ambassador Mansu. I'm sorry, but since your country has made such a choice, our country has no choice but to meet you on the battlefield. Facing the declaration of war in front of him, Mansu accepted it silently. I'm sorry. Since this is your country's choice, let's meet on the battlefield. Let the guns decide who is the loser locally. Looking at the tough Ottoman ambassador in front of him, Boccona showed a hint of admiration. Mansu, you have 72 hours to evacuate. I don't think you will forget it. Faced with Boccona's words, Mansu replied calmly. We will not forget that this is the basic quality of a qualified diplomat. Goodbye, Your Excellency Boccona. I hope to see you in Istanbul. Don't worry, I will be waiting for your representative in Rome. In the evening, the front page headlines in major newspapers read that Italy was now in a state of war with the Ottoman Empire because of its rude rejection of reasonable demands at this moment. The date on the newspaper was so eye-catching. On March 4, 1890, Italy and the Ottomans went to war. Chapter 209 The fleet sets sail. The news that Italy and the Ottomans have declared war is currently the biggest news in Europe. Many countries have made predictions about the war between the two countries, and most of them are leaning toward Italy's victory point, because no matter what, Italy is one of the great powers. As for the Ottoman Empire, it was kicked out after the 10th Turkish-Russian War. Of course, these predictions are just watching from the other side. Only the two countries themselves know exactly what to do. However, for the Italian government, the declaration of war was not as important as it thought, because its preparations were basically completed. Although it's a bit rushed, fortunately, the efficiency is very good now, and Italy's preparations for the war are basically completed. At present, all materials are basically ready, and after the declaration of war, as Italy's most powerful military branch, the Navy will bear the first wave of strike force. Taranto is located in Puglia, on the Bay of Taranto on the Ionian Sea. It is an important port city in southeastern Italy and a distribution center for agricultural products in the southeast of the Apennine Peninsula. Of course, Taranto is more famous for its status as a military port. The port is one of the three backbone ports of the Italian Navy and the most geographically important one. Thanks to the port's excellent water depth and good wind-sheltered environment, basically all the warships prepared by the Navy for the war gathered here. From the latest 3 Turin-class battleships to the 2 Dario-class ships Dario and Analo, as well as the 3 improved classes Lepanto, Francesco Morosini and Italia. The total tonnage of these battleships alone reaches 110,000 tons, which can be said to be the strongest battleship formation in Italy. The heaviest of these 8 battleships is not the 3 Turin-class battleships, but the Lepanto. The ship has a standard displacement of 16,154 tons and a full load of 17,670 tons. It can be said to be the largest warship in Italy at present. The most powerful thing about this class is of course its 4 431mm main guns. However, in addition to the main guns, it is also equipped with different 152mm secondary guns, ranging from 2 to 8. However, this class has the same problem as its prototype Dario class. Since the main gun is located in the middle of the hull, the range of fire towards the rear is limited. It mainly exerts side firepower output. Therefore, its function is far less useful than the new Turin class, and the same is true for the evaluation of officers and soldiers. Of course, in addition to battleship formations, there are also huge cruiser formations gathered here. From the most advanced Venetian class to cruisers with sails and steam engines, cruisers from all eras are simply gathered here. Along the way, the 5 rings and 8 gates are dazzling, blinding people's eyes. There is only one reason for this, and that is that there are not many Italian cruisers, so as long as they can be used, most of them are tasked with intercepting Ottoman merchant ships and cutting off their Mediterranean islands from Istanbul Point. As for the Ottoman navy, as long as it dares to come out, the upgrading of the Venices will let it know that you should have thrown away these rags long ago. Although the Italian navy also has a bunch of tattered cruisers, Italy has capable battleships, while you, the Ottomans, only have tattered cruisers. However, these warships gathered in Taranto still have their own tasks. The tasks of the battleship formation are completely different from those of the cruiser, because this time Admiral Garlock, the Minister of the Navy, came to Taranto in person to see off the Navy's fleet. This operation is related to whether Italy's first shot can be fired well, so General Gorek did not dare to neglect it. This time, to see off the fleet, the old admiral was in a good mood. Many of the battleships here were built under his own supervision, especially the battleships, which were basically newly built, after he had controlled the navy for more than 10 years. Of course, now that he is older, in his 70s, he is beginning to think about retirement. But before that, he needs to leave a qualified successor for the navy. As for who can become this person, let's look at the performance in this war. Admiral Gorek did not talk about these thoughts to anyone, because if they were leaked, it would break the peaceful atmosphere among the Navy's subordinates. He absolutely did not want to see such a thing happen. Lieutenant General Yagia, this war is very important to our navy. I hope that you can let the navy show our style in this battle, and not let the army dominate the limelight. The full name of Lieutenant General Yagia mentioned by Admiral Gorek is Mattis Yagia. He joined the Navy of the Kingdom of Sardinia in 1853, and performed very well during his many years of service, so Gorek the general listed him as one of his future successors. As you command, Your Excellency, Admiral, you will see the heroic presence of the Navy, wherever it is needed in the Mediterranean. Lieutenant General Yaji was also unequivocal and just patted his chest to assure himself. And this operation is also an opportunity for him, because this time he will take a battleship formation to bombard Albania, to create opportunities for the army to land. According to the Ottoman Empire's barren coastal defenses in the area, this is completely stress-free. Even so, Lieutenant General Yaji will never dare to be careless. If there is any unexpected damage to his fleet, it will be a loss. At Alt Point, Admiral Gorek then met with several other captains, including our Major Gomes and Lieutenant Colonel Lifa. It needs to be explained here that unlike Major Gomes, who commanded the armored cruiser Venetia, Lifa, who had just transferred back to the Navy from the Kingdom's adjutant, is now the captain of Quirinal Point. Although there seems to be little difference between the two, basically everyone knows that Lieutenant Colonel Lifa, who has been the King's adjutant, has a brighter future. Not to mention anything else, even the military rank reflects the difference. This is also reflected in the battleships commanded by the other two people. Although the armored cruiser commanded by Gomes is also the main battleship of the Navy, the new battleship commanded by Lifa is the Navy's favorite. You must know that someone like Lifa, who can become a lieutenant colonel in his early 30s, and can command the latest battleships in the Navy, can only have one goal: to become a strong contender for the Lord of the Navy. No matter how bad he is, he will still be a commander of a large fleet in the future. As for Gomes, he is already one step behind Lifa. The future direction of development depends on whether there are good opportunities. Of course they are lucky compared to others. Didn't you see that Admiral Garlock, as the Minister of the Navy, said a few words too deliberately when shaking hands with the two people? This is a matter of treatment difference. But no matter what, everything needs to be done in battle, and in this war with the Ottomans, they will each rely on their own abilities. After Admiral Garlick's reception, the naval commanders returned to their warships one after another. Then, under the orders of their respective commanders, they set sail, and rushed to their respective battlefields. As the most conspicuous battleship formation, it sailed all the way east towards the other side of the sea. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210 Bombardment of Durrës. As the largest port city in Albania, Durrës was also the only decent seaport of the Ottoman Empire on the Adriatic Sea. The Ottoman Empire stationed a regiment of troops here. However, as relations with Italy deteriorated, the Ottoman Empire sent the 21st Army Division was stationed there. The main soldiers of this division come from the Levant region, and its officers and soldiers are all staunch YSL believers. In addition, the people in this region are very loyal to the empire. Therefore, although they are not as good as the troops composed of native officers and soldiers from the Asia Minor Peninsula, they are still in the Ottoman Empire. The army can also be called the backbone. Therefore, placing it in Durrës also serves as a first-line defensive force. After all, it is just across the strait from mainland Italy, which is a bit too dangerous. Of course, it is impossible to defend the entire Albanian region with the 21st Division alone. There are reinforcements behind it. The 2nd Macedonian Army, which has arrived in Albania for 3 days, is its strong backing. In addition to the 21st Division, the group army also has the 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 31st Divisions, with a total strength of 81,000. In addition, there are 2 garrison divisions in Albania with nearly 100,000 troops. I hope it will make Italy give up its attempt on Albania. This is an idea within the Ottoman Empire, but no one knows whether it will work. Of course, in addition to the 2nd Macedonian Army, the 1st and 3rd Macedonian armies are also stepping up preparations for war. Not only to prevent the Albanian region from being invaded by Italy, but also to look in other directions. The surrounding small Balkan countries are not peaceful either, but these are all far away. For Major General Ataturk, the commander of the 21st Division of the Ottoman Army, who is currently the defense officer of Durrës, these have little to do with him. The most important thing is to strengthen the defense of Durrës strength point. But speaking of defense power, this made him feel a little annoyed, because he didn't know, until he arrived in Durrës, that there was a lack of sufficient coastal defense artillery. Of course, if you count the coastal defense artillery that is older than Ataturk, and the fort officers and soldiers who are more like coolies than soldiers, then Durrës is not lacking in coastal defense power. But whether this thing is reliable or not, God bless it, it doesn't matter. Therefore, on the first day, after taking over Durrës, Major General Ataturk asked for advanced coastal defense artillery from the rear. At least to be able to deter the enemy. When he came, it was a pity that Major General Ataturk could not wait for the arrival of the coastal defense artillery, and he was notified of the declaration of war between the two countries as soon as possible. This made Major General Ataturk extremely angry, because it meant that the port defense of Durrës could not be strengthened. Of course, if Italy does not come to Albania for 2 or 3 months, then its plan can still be implemented. But just think about it, there is no possibility of implementing it. Haven't you seen that Italy wants the empire's territories in North Africa and Albania? This is enough to illustrate the problem. But being upset doesn't solve the problem, so he has to do the same thing as setting up defenses. Of course, this doesn't trouble him. Among them, the fort on the north shore of the most important port had already been taken over by his own artillery troops. He wouldn't be at ease with the trash from the original fort. On the 4th day after the two countries declared war, Major General Ataturk just walked out of his headquarters and planned to go to the city to check how the army fortifications were being built. But before he could get on his horse, he suddenly heard an emergency bell ringing. This made him realize immediately that this was the siren sound of an enemy attack. This was the bell he set himself to remind the soldiers and civilians to pay attention. After hearing the ringing of the bell, he immediately returned to the headquarters without caring about other things and climbed to the observation deck on the 3rd floor of the headquarters. His headquarters was set up on a hill to the north of Durrës, which was a good location to observe the movements of the sea. The weather was good today, so he took a telescope to observe the specific situation. In the southwest, where the sea and the sky meet, dozens of ships appear in his lens. The appearance of its ship is that of a warship, and it is heading straight towards the port of Durrës. At first glance, it seems that the person coming is evil. Order to go down immediately and prepare the forts. We are facing the enemy's warships. When He said this. Major General Ataturk frowned because he found that his coastal batteries might be a little weak against the incoming fleet. His worries were justified because the incoming fleet was a battleship formation led by Lieutenant General Yaji. 8 battleships of more than 10,000 tons, protected by nearly 10 other warships, rushed towards Durrës with great momentum. On his flagship Turin, after seeing the port of Durrës appearing in front of him, he turned around to convey the order to the orderlies. Send a semaphore to Major General Hilmer of the 1st Battleship Group, and ask him to lead the 1st Battleship Group, to launch an artillery attack on the Delaco fort on the south coast. I will personally lead the 2nd Group, to destroy the enemy's North Shore fort. In Vice Admiral Yagi's fleet, 3 Turin-class ships were organized into the 2nd battleship formation, while the 2 Dario-class ships and 3 improved-class ships were unified into the 1st battleship formation. Yes, Lieutenant General. As the messenger left, the young captain of the Turin, Lieutenant Colonel Leifer, standing behind the Lieutenant General, showed an expression that he was hesitant to speak. Captain, do you have something to say to me? As if he saw Leifer's actions behind him, Lieutenant General Yager asked casually. Yes, Commander. Faced with Leifer's words, Lieutenant General Yager turned his head and looked at him. Then asked, is it too hasty for us to rush to bombard Durrës in such a hurry? Why don't we test the enemy's firepower first and check whether the enemy has laid mines? Regarding Leifer's slightly cautious words, Lieutenant General Yaji looked at him with interest. Lieutenant Colonel Leifer, why do I feel like you are older than me? Faced with the Lieutenant General's unexpected words, Leifer's surprise was completely written on his face. What? Are you not as young and energetic as an old man like me? Leifer, who was aroused for a while, looked a little better seeing Leifer's performance. Lieutenant General Yaji looked at him. Do you think that the order I gave was a joke on the safety of the fleet, or that I, the commander, am incompetent? Faced with Lieutenant General Yage's words, although Leifer didn't know what made the commander angry, he was about to apologize when he stopped him. After stopping him, Lieutenant General Yaji looked at him and shook his head. It seems that you have been worried about gains and losses in the past few years, since you left your frontline position in the Navy. This is not acceptable. How can a commander worry about gains and losses on the battlefield? Leifer finally reacted to Lieutenant General Yage's words. He quickly bowed deeply to the Lieutenant General to express his gratitude. I'm sorry, I haven't been on the ship in the past few years, and I didn't even notice that I had this problem. The 2 of them were not playing riddles, but Agile, as a Lieutenant General, was teaching Leifer, a junior Leifer, who had just been awakened. Felt much better now. Then he said to Lieutenant General Yaji, Your Excellency, I'm much better. That's good. I'm very optimistic about your future. Only then did Lieutenant General Yaji smile. While the 2 were talking, the fleet split into 2. A formation of 3 Turin-class ships pounced on the North Shore fort in Durrës port, while 5 Dario-class ships pounced on the South Fort Point. As the enemy fleet got closer and closer, the Ottoman commander defending the fort gave loud orders. Now, fire on the enemy fleet. Boom, boom, boom. The artillery battle in Durrës begins. Chapter 211 Preparation before landing. The Navy's bombardment of Durrës was just the first shot of the Italian-Turkish War. Let's call it the Italian-Turkish War. In Italian terms, I thought it was fighting Austria-Hungary. However, there is no need to guess the outcome of this bombardment. With the old-fashioned artillery of Durrës, they can be the opponent of the Italian battleship formation. Of course, since the Italian military prioritized sending battleship formations to bombard Durrës, it must have its own purpose. In seaport cities such as Bari, Brindisi, and Taranto in Italy, things have become quite different during this period. Because the military camp outside the city was full of soldiers, even the military camp could not accommodate them, and they were arranged to build temporary barracks. Of course, these energetic soldiers stationed in these cities will naturally provide city-specific consumption. You can see officers and soldiers wearing grey-green military uniforms everywhere regardless of the catering and entertainment venues. However, while they are increasing revenue for the city, they are also doing a lot of shitty things. But fortunately, considering the domestic influence and the fear of the military police, it was basically jealousy. fights and other things, but even so, the occurrence of 20 or 30 incidents a day is still a headache for the local government. However, considering that these officers and soldiers were about to go to the battlefield, the local government did not make trouble with the garrison point. As for Lieutenant General Simeon, who commanded these armies, for the same reason, he did not manage these bad things very much. After all, the military discipline of European armies is just like that. It is a bit difficult for him to be as disciplined as the Chinese army in later generations. This time Lieutenant General Simeon was able to get the role of commander of the first wave of landing troops. In addition to his record, there were also factors such as the goodwill of the old military leaders. Moreover, this time he was no longer facing African natives. Not only did he have many things to do, but he was also under a lot of pressure. So as long as those officers and soldiers don't go too far, then he will not prohibit the officers and soldiers from traveling. After all, if you are going to the battlefield, you have to relax. Point in the temporary headquarters outside Berry, Lieutenant General Simeon was also doing the last inspection before the war. You prepared with enough ammunition? We have already loaded the ammunition on the ship in advance according to the configuration of 2 bases for soldiers, 4 bases for artillery, and 2 bases for machine guns. Just waiting for the signal from the Navy. We can transport it directly with the soldiers. The person who answered Simone was Colonel Harper, the logistics officer, who was responsible for allocating and counting the various supplies and ammunition that needed to be carried. Point after hearing the words of the logistics chief, Lieutenant General Simeon nodded secretly, expressing his recognition. The importance of logistics to the army cannot be overemphasized, let alone the modern army that relies most on logistics. What about shovels, raincoats, tents and other supplies? After asking about weapons and ammunition, Simeon turned to other supplies. Currently, we have prepared 13,000 shovels, and another 5,000 can be delivered within 2 days. There are now 43,000 raincoats, 4,500 tents, and we have also prepared more than 4,000 steel drills and matching hammers, as well as 50 tons of explosives, 30,000 meters of telephone wires, and 15 sets of field telephone systems. In Colonel Harper's detailed report, Simone more intuitively understood how much supplies he needed. These supplies are all necessary for him to command the army. Fortunately, the climate in Albania, where he is about to fight, is still good. Otherwise he would need to carry more things. But the report was not only good news. Colonel Harper also talked about some not so good news. In addition, we inspected the military boots that were delivered and found that 3,000 pairs had quality problems. Many of the boots had cracked before they were worn. We also found that 2,000 pairs of gloves had quality problems. After listening to Colonel Harper's words, Simone's face became unsightly, but then he calmed down and said casually, "Report these situations to the Army Logistics Department. As for the items with quality problems, just keep them. In the future, materials with quality problems will be handled in this way. In addition, ask your people to check more, and don't let these inferior products be sent to in the hands of the soldiers. As long as you do these things, the credit will be yours." Simone used credit as a reward for his hard work, and Colonel Harper didn't know how to answer. "Please rest assured, I will carefully check every delivered material." Faced with Colonel Harper's words, Simone patted his shoulder as encouragement. As for why there are so many inferior products in the supplies, Simone doesn't want to get angry and ask, because if this thing is investigated seriously, a large number of people will be involved. But he can't do that at the moment, especially when he still needs the support of those old generals. In addition, this matter is no secret in the military. As a senior officer, Simeon does not have the ability or qualifications to solve these problems. However, the common practice is just like him, throwing these inferior products in the warehouse. Finally, after being stored for too long, they lose moisture and are scrapped. So, after discovering these inferior products, Simone continued to check the materials in the warehouse and then brought people to prepare to go back. But at this time, he almost collided with a messenger, and the messenger brought him a message. "Lieutenant General, the Chief of Staff asked you to go back quickly. There is news coming from Durrës." Upon hearing the words of the messenger, Simeon immediately hurried back to the headquarters. This was also the most important thing related to him leading the troops to land. How's it going, Chief of Staff? Simeon, who rushed all the way back to the headquarters, burst into the door and asked Major General Bartlett, who was waiting for him. Yes, they are paired up again this time. Mainly because they worked well together in East Africa, and the first wave of landing operations was very important. They were still paired together for Simeon and Bartlett. This is better. They are all acquaintances who have worked together before, which saves the running in period, and they can each do what they want to do as soon as they get started. Half an hour ago, the naval liaison ship arrived in Bari. They brought the news that the Navy had removed the obstacles in the port of Durrës. How fast? Simone was a little surprised when he heard the news. He knew that according to the plan, the naval ship formation should have arrived in the sea off Durrës yesterday. It only took 1 day and 1 night to level the Ottoman coastal defenses there, which was indeed a bit fast. This is the battle report. The Chief of Staff handed him the battle report, and Simeon read it at a glance. After reading it, he praised it. I didn't expect that the Navy's contribution this time was so great that it pulled the battleship to Durrës. Yes, now that the Navy has smoothed the path for itself, there's not much to say. Simone immediately spoke, issuing an order that all officers and soldiers must return to camp before dark. We will set off tomorrow. Sure. No problem. After answering Simeon's order, Bartlett continued to ask, then which troop will be allowed to board the ship first tomorrow? Bartlett's question was very level, and its meaning was basically the same as who should play forward point. After thinking about it for a while, Simone said, let the 8th Division go up first, just to see if Pascal is lying. In this case, Simeon still gives priority to reliable troops. After all, the 8th Division is a unit that I have led before, and I still know its capabilities well. Chapter 212 Undercurrent in Crete. When Simeon took his troops and prepared to land, the same thing happened on the island of Crete, which is located in the Mediterranean Sea. Speaking of Crete, the Minoan civilization on the island is world famous. However, in its long history, the Cretans have always been accompanied by the rise of regional powers and have been controlled by them. The most recent change was when the Ottoman Empire captured the island from the Venetians. However, with the rise of nationalism in modern times, Greek-speaking Cretans gradually became dissatisfied with the declining Ottoman Empire. They were somewhat eager to merge with Greece, which had the same language and culture, but this was not an easy task. The Ottoman Empire did not want to give up the island at all, so nearly 30,000 Ottoman troops were stationed on the island. Leaving Crete, one can only wait for the opportunity. The advent of the Italian-Turkish War has made many people feel that the time has come, so undercurrents are surging, making people even more impetuous, especially yesterday. Alarming news emerged. Italian warships appeared off the coast of Crete and captured several ships out to sea. This caused the undercurrent below to surge out. In the secret room of mansion in Heraklion, Candido Solari, a celebrity on the island of Crete, is receiving a mysterious guest. Solari is a very famous local man. The olive oil production factory he founded accounts for nearly half of the island's output. Although Crete's olive oil production is not high, the island's olive oil is famous, and many nobles and wealthy people like to use the olive oil produced in Crete. In addition, Solari also controls 1/3 of the island's wine production and nearly 1/10 of the import and export trade of goods. He can be said to be a well-known figure on the island, with nearly 3,000 people directly work for it. You must know that at this time, there were only more than 200,000 people in Crete, and basically 1 out of every 20 households was working for it. This can also be seen from Solari's status on the island. Even the local Ottoman military and political figures give him 3 points. Of course, the taxes that should be collected still have to be collected, but a little more consideration should be given to other exorbitant taxes and miscellaneous taxes. Since it occupies such a position economically on the island, it is natural to want to gain political status. However, he cannot squeeze into the political circles of Istanbul, and at the same time, he is unwilling to squeeze in. So staying on the island to develop his political capabilities became Solary's concern point. So over the years, the island's political groups have received more or less favors from him, which made him even more enthusiastic about politics. Of course, the main idea of the cretins on the island is still very simple, that is, to merge with Greece, which has the same culture and language, so that Crete can escape the fate of being squeezed by the Ottomans before. This, Solary, like most Greeks, mainly wanted to merge with Greece. However, in the past 2 years, his thoughts have changed somewhat, and the person who made him change his thoughts is the man in front of him, Mr. Hibbok from Rome. This time I met a middle-aged man at a cocktail party 2 years ago. After talking to him, I felt very interesting, so the relationship between the two gradually changed from strangers to mature people, and then to friends during this period. Hibbok proposed a bold idea. Since they wanted to get rid of the oppression of the Ottomans, why should the cretins choose Greek merger instead of other ideas, such as independence? After laughing at his friend Hibbok's whimsical idea, Solary talked about the weakness of Crete and the strength of the Ottoman Empire. It did not rely on Greece, which had a similar culture, but the cretins themselves. Facing Solary's words, his friend suddenly said, "Who says it's not possible? The cretins can rely on the help of others to gain independence like a dream." When Hibbok said these words, Solary knew that there was something wrong with his friend's identity, but this is nothing to him. He is not a loyal subject of the Ottoman Empire. Is it necessary to report this for him? Of course. This sentence also opened up a hint of Solary's ambition, because he said that according to his reputation in Crete, it is also very suitable to serve as the head of government of an independent country. The temptation of power and fame made Solary gradually fall in love with him. With the subsequent conversation between the two, he gradually learned about the power behind Hibbok. Although Italians are not the most ideal choice, they are the most suitable choice at the moment. Especially after the news of the outbreak of war between Italy and the Ottomans came, Solary became even more restless. Although he is very famous in Crete, there are still 3 or 4 people with similar fame on the island. In this case, it is important to seize the opportunity. This will mean whether you are the number 1 or number 2 in the future. If it is later, then the number 3 or 4 may also be possible. So he quickly found Hibbok, an old friend, and wanted to implement the issue of independence as soon as possible. Hibbok, last time you talked about the issue of the post-independence political system. I think a parliamentary system can be implemented, which will allow cretins to be more involved in the operation of the post-independence country. In addition, I think the issue of hiring consultants from your country, this is also very reasonable. After all, when our new independent government operates, we will also need guidance from others. In the secret room, Solary told his old friend the conditions he could accept. However, Hibbok, as an old friend, was a little dissatisfied with Solary's direct words. "Solary, I need to tell you something. Pacheco promised our country that, if Crete becomes independent, then he will hire our country's officers to help Crete form its own army." After hearing Hibbok's words, Solary cursed Pacheco in his heart. Of course he wasn't surprised at all when Italy reached out to other people. Everyone is playing politics. It is strange that anyone can put their hope in one person. He knew that the Italians were in contact with 3 or 4 targets, but the most threatening one was Pacheco. Although he is not as rich as Solary, he is much better than him politically. Its leader, the Cretan United Forces Party, is also one of the top 3 political groups on the island. Although its organization has less than 1,000 people, this is already very good for Crete. Faced with Hibbok's move to threaten each other with conditions from both sides, Solary had absolutely nothing to do. It seems that, if you want to add points in front of the Italians, you must come up with some new conditions. Thinking of this, Solary gritted his teeth and said, "I think that in the future, the new government can not only ask your country's officers to train the army, but even the police can be trained by your country in the future. After all, these policemen of the Ottoman government should not be trusted." Faced with Solary's words, Hibbok did not give a direct reply, but spoke instead. "As for the issue after the formation of this new government, I think you need to do it as soon as possible, because within a month at most, our country will need to make a choice. As for what to choose, although Hibbok didn't say it clearly, Solary still doesn't know. Of course, Hibbok didn't just say this to Solary, but also to several others. As for whether they will inform the Ottomans, there is no need to worry, because under the blockade of the Italian navy, the Ottomans cannot bring in reinforcement at all except for the troops currently in Crete Point. In this case, there is nothing to be afraid of. Besides, they told the Ottomans what good it could do for them. So facing Solari with a pensive expression, Hibbert drifted away. Chapter 213 Capture of Durrës. The undertow in Crete has not yet been revealed, but the dawn in Durrës can already be seen. However, the dawn of Durrës is more for the Italians, because the Italian troops who landed from Zinia, 6 kilometers away from Durrës in the north, and Galimi, 6 kilometers away from the south, have already invaded the city of Durrës. The 21st Ottoman Army Division, which is responsible for the defense, and the local security forces are fighting stubbornly in the city, relying on buildings. Retreat, retreat. In front of a street fortification, the Ottoman officer leading the team shouted loudly for his soldiers to retreat. They had repelled 3 enemy attacks, but the cost was high. There were now only a dozen people left in the team of more than 40 people, and they were even joined by the new recruits assigned to them. As he shouted, more than a dozen soldiers wearing khaki Ottoman uniforms poured out from different buildings. They bent over and trotted toward the officer with their weapons in hand. Behind them, several young men wearing civilian clothes also held weapons and ran with the soldiers. However, judging from the fact that they stood upright and had panicked expressions on their faces, they must be signs of local recruits. Snapped. There was a sudden gunshot, and a bullet fired from an unknown source hit one of them. The recruit who was shot in the thigh screamed and fell to the ground, which frightened the recruits behind him to stop. As for the soldiers running in front, they quickened their pace without any intention of stopping. Don't stop, hurry up and keep running. Seeing the performance of the new recruits behind him, the commander shouted anxiously. No one knows what it means to stop on the battlefield. It's just that these new recruits who have been in the army for less than a week should not go to the battlefield at all. It just makes the defenders too weak and there is no time to train them. The officer shot attracted fire from an unknown source, and there was only a gunshot, and a puff of smoke bounced off the ground in front of the officer. This frightened the officer and he immediately rolled and crawled to hide behind the obstacle in the corner. This made an Italian soldier in a building 400 meters away shake his head and quickly turn his gun to other locations. But thanks to the officer's shout, the recruits immediately imitated the other soldiers and hurried over here. There were even 2 people carrying the injured recruit, trying to bring him over. Faced with such a man who suddenly appeared brave, the officer held back his words. But while these 2 men were commendable for their courage, it was clear that they did something reckless. Snapped. There was another gunshot, hitting one of them in the neck, and blood spurted out from his neck in an instant, staining the ground under his feet red. But he could only fall to the ground helplessly without saying a word, and his whole body began to twitch. Everyone knew that he was hopeless. As for the other one, his face turned pale with fright. The sight that flashed before his eyes made him run towards the officer, not caring about the wounded soldier he had rescued before. The enemy is over there. The sound of a gunshot caused one of the sharp-eyed soldiers to immediately spot the target point. Now that we know the enemy's location, it's easy to handle, and the officer immediately gave the order. Shoot him immediately, and go to the other 2 to pull the one who is not dead over. Following his order, there was a sudden burst of gunfire, making the Italian soldiers responsible for sniping unable to raise their heads at all. After knowing that he was exposed, the soldier quietly left with his beloved M88 Carcano rifle. He was unwilling to continue to stay in this exposed position. After the wounded soldiers were picked up, the officer continued. I received an order requiring us to immediately leave Waddle Street, where we are stationed, and retreat toward Walsh Street. Some soldiers were puzzled by the officer's order. Why are we retreating to the edge of the city? Where's all the nonsense? Just follow the orders. The complaining soldier was immediately silenced. After being reprimanded by the officer, the others, led by officers, retreated toward Walsh Street along the area still under their own control. The sound of guns and artillery fighting along the way never stopped, and the fighting on both sides was still going on. Throughout the city of Durrës, there were many teams like this officer. They all continued to retreat after resisting for a while. Faced with the actions of the defenders, how could Major General Pascal, the commander in charge of the attack, not feel it? It Seems that the enemy wants to escape. In a safe area set aside in the city, Major General Pascal looked at a newly hung map of the city of Durrus and the temporary headquarters and expressed his judgment. Colonel Babel, the chief of staff of the 8th Division beside him, asked, "So what do we do?" Of course Major General Pascal knew what the chief of staff meant. This is asking him whether to keep or let go of the enemy. If they stay, there's nothing much to say, just send troops to surround the entire Durrus. In this case, if the enemy wants to break through, they will have to pay the price with blood. However, surrounding the enemy will make it more difficult to capture the city, and will also delay their time. As for letting go, there's nothing much to say. Increase the offensive on the front and both wings, to make the enemy feel that they can't stay any longer and flee immediately. Advantages, disadvantages, and retention are the other way around. However, this will also make Pascal feel a little unwilling. You must know that in the last war in the colonies, he led the 8th Division and achieved great military exploits, which made him famous in the army. In this war, he had very high expectations for himself. After gaining the trust of the military commander and being appointed as a vanguard by his juniors, he actually had little success. How could he bear it? So when faced with the words of his chief of staff, Major General Pascal hesitated. One side is the mission, the other side is the military exploits. You cannot have both. Hey, forget it. After a long time, Major General Pascal sighed. He had made his choice. Order the troops to increase their offensive and drive these Ottomans out of Durrus. In addition, send a message to the following 14th Division, asking them to speed up the pace, and the landing troops will be given priority to be reinforced. In the end, he suppressed his expectations with the goal of completing the task. I'll give the order right away. After obtaining Major General Pascal, the Chief of Staff immediately prepared to issue orders to the various units following Major General Pascal's order. The officers and soldiers of the 8th Division on the front line immediately launched a more violent attack. As for the Italian army's offensive, the defenders immediately felt it. Facing the incoming Italian army, the defenders desperately used various weapons to fight back, but the Italian side had an absolute advantage in terms of firepower. Although the performance of the new Italian rifles in close-range street fighting was not much better than the old weapons of the Ottoman army, the Italian small-caliber artillery became a big killer after the army pushed it into the city. Except for a very few fortress-like buildings, other buildings looked like paper in front of them. Two small-caliber guns, 37 and 57 millimeters, caused Ottoman officers and soldiers to suffer a lot. Faced with such a situation, Major General Ataturk, who was defending the city, knew that it was time to retreat. So that night, the local garrison of more than 7,000 people withdrew from the west under the cover of darkness. Faced with the retreat of the defenders, the 8th Division had no intention of stopping them. So the next morning the 8th Division captured Durrus, and Italy gained its first port in Albania. This will greatly promote the next battle. Chapter 214 Macedonian Army. Tirana is the core city of Albania. The city is very young and was founded by a Turkish general in the early 17th century. In order to attract immigrants, he built mosques, bakeries, and baths. With the development of transportation and the increasing caravan traffic, Tirana gradually became the core city of Albania. Faced with such a city, the Ottoman military certainly did not want to surrender it to Italy. Although the city was only more than 20 kilometers away from Durrus, it still sent 2 divisions of troops to defend Tirana. Some people may ask why the Ottoman army only sent so few troops. Didn't the Second Macedonian army have more than 80,000 people? At first glance, you can tell that you have little understanding of military affairs. You must know that when two armies are facing each other, especially in modern times, supply lines are very important. The location and terrain of Albania determine that the Ottoman army here must not fight Italy on plain terrain. The reason is simple. The Ottoman army's supply line is longer than that of Italy. Moreover, the supply lines of the Ottoman army, because the sea power is on the Italian side, basically can only go by land. The supplies have to be transported over the Dinara Mountains of 1,000 to 2,000 meters. The cost of transporting supplies alone for the Ottoman army is 10 times more expensive than Italy. After all, Italy can transport supplies through convenient sea routes, which is not comparable to the Ottoman transportation line, which requires traveling over mountains and ridges, and using energy storage point. The transportation distance between the two is also different. Although the Ottomans have war preparation warehouses in Skopje, Salonika and other places, which store a large number of guns and ammunition, these materials were originally prepared to break out war with the surrounding small countries. Supplies that can be compared with the Italian war. Now the Ottoman Empire transports a large amount of military supplies from Istanbul to the Macedonian region. He also transported supplies from Macedonia to wherever they were needed. This supply line stretching for nearly 1,000 kilometers is a headache for many people. So for the Ottoman Empire, choosing the battlefield was very important. Marshal Nuri Pasha, the war minister who had experienced many battles, knew this very well. So the battle plan he made was to rely on the favorable terrain of the Dinara Mountains to consume the Italian army. When the time was right, Osman was turning his back on defense. I have to admit that this plan is very consistent with the actual situation of the Ottoman army. However, this will also lead to the strategic abandonment of Albania's coastal areas, considering that giving up directly like this would be detrimental to the Ottoman Empire. It became the only option to resist to a limited extent before letting go. This is also the reason why Major General Ataturk's 21st Division chose to retreat after seeing the Italian army's fierce offensive. Of course, this retreat does not come without paying any price. When the 21st Division retreated, except for the guns and a few light artillery in their hands, all other equipment was abandoned in Durrës. In addition, the 21st Division had more than 8,000 people when it broke out. Now there are only more than 6,000 people left. Although some of them can return in the future, it would be good to have at most 200 to 300 people. You must know that when the 21st Division entered Durrës, there were 13,000 people. Plus the new recruits from the local area, the highest number reached 18,000. This loss was really huge. Of course, the casualties of the attacking Italian army were not small. According to his estimate, they should be more than 3,000. Don't think this is a small amount. You must know that the Italian army also has the help of warships to crush them with firepower. This is also the reason why the Ottoman army only placed one division in Durrës. One more thing to say is that the current strength of the 2nd Macedonian army is more than 80,000. After receiving reinforcement from the 24th and 33rd divisions from Central Thrace, the total strength of the army exceeded 100,000. But when it comes to the 21st Division, the remaining officers and soldiers of the division, led by Major General Ataturk, have just arrived at Walla, a key town in the Burs Mountains. The 1st Brigade of the 16th Division was stationed in the town. After receiving them, barracks and food were immediately arranged for their friendly troops who had fought with Italy to eat and rest. As for Major General Ataturk, there is no need to worry because he has a better place. After swallowing the last bite of bread in his hand, Ataturk opened his mouth and thanked the commander of the 1st Brigade of the 16th Division who accompanied him, Colonel Abriz. On behalf of the 21st Division, I would like to express my gratitude to you for your help during the breakout. The officers and soldiers of the 21st Division did not rest at all. They rushed all the way from Durrës to here. Naturally, they were tired and hungry. Therefore, it was very important for the 21st Division to get food and rest time at this time. Facing Major General Ataturk's thanks, Colonel Abulis could not accept it. He waved his hand and said, "This is just a trivial matter. I have great admiration for the 21st Division who is resisting on the front line." Having said this, Colonel Abulis was about to say something else when he heard a rapid knock on the door. "Come in." "What's the matter?" Faced with this knock on the door, Colonel Alabiz was a little unhappy. Didn't you see that he was entertaining Major General Ataturk? He didn't have any discernment at all. But the words of the young officer who came in made him immediately correct his attitude. Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha asked Major General Ataturk to rush to Tirana, where he is waiting for His Majesty the Major General. The Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha mentioned by this officer was the commander of the 2nd Macedonian Army and their superior, Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha, is in Tirana. Not only did this come from Colonel Alabiz, but even Ataturk also asked. The two people asked because the news was sudden. You must know that the headquarters of the 2nd Army is in the small town of Badr in the Dinara Mountains. It is nearly 60 kilometers from there to Tirana. Yes, I heard from the messenger that he just arrived in Tirana last night. Facing the two commanders' simultaneous questions, although the officer felt a little strange, he still answered truthfully. After listening to the officer's words, Colonel Abriz said with a smile, "I didn't expect that Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha would want to see you." As soon as he arrived in Tirana, of course, he did not expect that the news that he sent someone to inform Tirana more than an hour ago that the 21st Division had retreated would lead to Lieutenant General Javad Pasha personally summoning the person involved. Facing Colonel Alibaz's words, Ataturk also said helplessly, "I didn't expect that either, but no matter what, if the Lieutenant General summons him, Ataturk must rush there. I'll ask someone to prepare the horses. You can ride them on the road faster. Thanks, everyone is a soldier, and it is wartime, so everything is kept simple." So after just a few words, Ataturk followed the arriving messenger, mounted the prepared horses, and set foot on the road to Tirana. As for the officers and soldiers of the 21st Division staying here, there is nothing to worry about, because the division's officer system is complete, so he does not need to worry. Chapter 215 Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha. In the city defense headquarters of Tirana, Lieutenant General Javad Pasha was listening to a report from the commander of the 16th Division, Major General Hashim. "Lieutenant General, the defense we currently deploy in Tirana is mainly divided into two parts. One part is deployed at the key points of the mountain passes of the Dinara Mountains, Walla and Vachali. This is mainly responsible for my 16th Division, and the other part of it is deployed in Tirana as a mobile force, which is under the responsibility of Major General Haldar's 31st Division, and is ready for reinforcement at any time." When Major General Hashim was talking, he couldn't help but glance at the Lieutenant General. After seeing that he had no objections, he continued to speak. "The reason for this arrangement is that, although the Dinara Mountains are not high and not very wide, only about 5 kilometers, there are only small roads in the mountains and heavy weapons such as artillery cannot be passed at all, so we only need to send a small number of troops to monitor." Major General Hashim then explained the weapons and ammunition reserves of the garrison in Tirana, as well as the training of new recruits as he introduced these situations. Lieutenant General Javad Pasha, the Supreme Commander of Albania, had a preliminary understanding of the situation in Tirana. "Very well, you did a great job." After praising the two men, Jawad Pasha continued, "Next, you need to consider your retreat arrangements if the war goes wrong in the future." Lieutenant General Jawad Pasha's direct words made the two of them look at each other. In fact, Lieutenant General Javad Pasha said this out of necessity. Early this morning, after receiving the news that Major General Ataturk had returned with the 21st Division, Javad Pasha was shocked by the huge number of casualties. There were more than 10,000 casualties, and only over 6,000 people retreated. How could he not be surprised by such heavy casualties? Although Duz is located on the seaside, which is not conducive to defense, such heavy casualties made Lieutenant General Javad Pasha feel that he could no longer fight like this. Facing the words of their immediate boss, the two of them were very moved. Who wants to see their troops suffer heavy casualties? And as generals, they also know that Tirana, where they are stationed, is not a place to stay for a long time. So after hearing what their boss said, the two nodded at the same time after a brief silence. After seeing the actions of the two men, Javad Pasha was also very satisfied. As long as the two men could make the troops suffer little losses, it would be very beneficial to the subsequent defense, based on the Dinara Mountains. Just when Javad Pasha wanted to continue chatting with the two, there was an announcement outside the door. "Your Majesty Commander, Major General Ataturk has arrived." Now that the person the boss wanted to summon had arrived, the two of them naturally chose a reason to escape without losing sight. When he walked out of the door and met Ataturk, he stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder to show encouragement. Ataturk took a deep breath and stood at the door and spoke loudly. "Report. Commander Ataturk of the 21st Division is here to report. Come in." The tone is obviously different from the previous two division commanders faced with this situation. Ataturk could only bite the bullet and walk in. "Do you know why I called you here immediately, Jawad Pasha?" who was sitting motionless on his chair, asked him in a calm tone point facing Jawad Pasha's question. Ataturk lowered his head and answered apologetically. No, why, I didn't lead the troops well this time. Facing Ataturk's words, Javad Pasha stood up immediately and threw the documents aside. His head was covered with scattered documents, and Ataturk stood there without daring to move. Ataturk, you are very capable, right? Have I ever taught you before that you should not be so desperate in terrace? If the terrain is at a disadvantage, be smart and withdraw as soon as possible. How did you lead the 21st Division? Casualties so big. Faced with Javad Pasha scolding, Ataturk was ashamed. Teacher, I was wrong. Yes, Jawad Pasha was the former commander of the 21st Division, but this happened several years ago. But after all, there is still such a thing as feelings. Seeing that the troops he had led before were beaten to a semi-crippling state, it was inevitable to get angry. As for Ataturk, although he was scolded by his old superior, he felt much more at ease inside. It's better to be scolded than to be polite. This means not treating yourself as an outsider, but still treating him as a confidant. Sure enough, his confidant was different. After some scolding, and after Jawad Pasha had calmed down, he spoke. Next, you take the 21st Division and retreat to Prilep. I will ask 6,000 people from the newly sent batch of supplementary troops to give priority to the 21st Division. The same goes for the weapons and equipment. Prilep is already in the North Macedonia region. It can be said that the 21st Division only needs to restore its combat effectiveness as soon as possible, because they are already about to withdraw from the Albanian region. This is the kind of treatment that can be replenished as needed. If the motley crew of future generations of anti-Japanese warfighters see it, they don't know how their eyes will turn red. But you still have to do something after taking advantage. And then Jawad Pasha said again, this time I will replenish you with soldiers and equipment. You must train these new soldiers within a month and be ready to be recruited by me at any time. By that time, if the 21st Division's combat effectiveness cannot be improved, I don't think you, the division commander, will do it. Give a sweet date and sound the alarm. Jawad Pasha holds the key to hiring people. Faced with his encouraging words, Ataturk stood up and made up his mind, as if he had been given a shot of blood. Teacher, don't worry. If something goes wrong here, you don't have to ask. I'll take off the uniform myself. Very good. I see your determination. It depends on your performance. Next, Javad Pasha, who put on a friendly expression, then pulled Major General Ataturk down and sat down. Currently, the 21st Division is the only unit that has fought against the Italian army. Tell us about your feelings about fighting against the Italian army. Faced with the teacher's inquiry, Ataturk certainly knew why. Although the situation of the Italian army has been known from the data, the paper and actual feelings are two different concepts. It is obvious that Javad Pasha needs the information his client knows. So regarding the specific situation of the Italian army, Ataturk told his superiors, based on his own feelings. This lasted for more than half an hour. Most of the time he was talking, and Jawad Pasha was listening and taking note of it. Sometimes he would also think about what he said and ask questions that interested him. After Ataturk finished speaking, Javad Pasha said to him, you haven't slept all day, so you're probably very tired. Go get some rest. After sending Ataturk away, Javad Pasha summed it up. In total, Ataturk said a few points. The first Italian army had very good weapons and equipment, and the Italian soldiers had a higher shooting accuracy than them at medium and long distances. Second, the Italian army has very good tactical coordination, and likes to use insertion tactics. Third, the Italian army's fighting will and morale are very good, similar to that of the 21st Division. They can often launch offensives even after suffering more than half of the casualties. Of course, there are many other points, but Jawad Pasha believes that the points he summarized are the main factors. Of course, he also learned from Ataturk that the 8th Division of the Italian army was fighting against him. He knew that this unit was considered elite in the Italian army, so the status of other units was slightly reduced. Based on the above situation, that is the strength of the Italian army. After feeling the bottom line, Javad Pasha believed that he needed to make corresponding deployments based on the characteristics of the Italian army. Chapter 216 Next Action. While Javad Pasha was considering how to deal with the incoming Italian army, Dus, which had just been captured by Italy, was also extremely busy point in the port that was destroyed by the Ottomans. A large number of engineers in military uniforms were busy repairing the pier. They did a good job. In one morning, they repaired a simple pier plank road, which was able to move everyone around. Ships that were crowded in the port were given direct access to disembark points due to insufficient structure. This pier plank road that has been repaired can only unload less heavy items such as soldiers and light artillery. This of course cannot meet the needs of the army, so these engineers are repairing a real high strength plank road used to unload various heavy equipment point on the other side of the pier. Simone, who had just landed, looked at the busy situation at the pier and spoke to the officer responsible for repairs at the scene. Thank you for your hard work these days. The port must be repaired within 3 days, and follow-up troops need to land, so your burden is not light, as you command. Your Majesty Commander, Simeon, then inspected the repair work in the port area, and stopped only when Major General Pascal felt it. Commander, it's too dangerous for you to come here alone. Why didn't you notify us in advance, so that we could pick you up? Hearing Major General Pascal's loud voice, Simone turned to look at him. Are there still enemies in Durrus that have not been eliminated? That's not true. What else could Major General Pascal say to his boss who acted out of common sense? In that case, what danger can I face in a port surrounded by heavy troops? Facing his stubborn boss, Major General Pascal had no choice but to let it go. Fortunately, the port inspection work was almost done, because the port of Durrus is not big, so the inspection was fast. Point after checking around, Simone looked at Major General Pascal who was following him and said, "Let's go. Take me to your headquarters, Commander. Please come this way." The two of them walked all the way to the current headquarters of Major General Pascal, which was the original Ottoman 21st Division headquarters in the city. After a simple tidying up, it is much better here. At least it looks neat and tidy, not as messy as when we first came here. Point in the combat hall. The current map of Albania has already been placed, with various marks on it. Among them, blue flags representing the Ottoman army are placed all over Albania, and only in Durrus there is a red flag representing Italy. Point. As soon as Simone came in, he looked at the map in front of him, and said to Major General Pascal next to him, "You're very well prepared." Facing Simeon's praise, Major General Pascal answered casually, "This is just preparation, in advance for the next battle." After a brief chat, Simeon talked about the reason why he landed early this time. The Ministry of War sent a letter asking us to take Tirana as soon as possible and drive the Ottoman forces into the mountains. Pascal showed a hint of curiosity about his boss Simone's words. Why would the Ministry of War issue such an order? Didn't it say it would be done within a month? Faced with Pascal's inquiry, Simeon gave his reasons. Because the French are restless at the border, we must be more vigilant. As for why he was restless, Simeon did not tell him clearly. Is it okay if the military leaders know about this? Don't distract the troops below at this time. However, due to this, the arrival time and scale of the second wave of reinforcement will be smaller. It was cut directly from 4 divisions to 2 divisions, and it would take a month to arrive. Are these French people crazy? Aren't they afraid of our revenge in the future if they do this at this time? Faced with Pascal's words, Simeon showed a wry smile. The French were really not afraid of them. Although Italy has developed well in recent years, the strength of the two countries has not changed. Who says the French are crazy this time? Their relationship with the Ottomans can be said to have a long history. Otherwise, the War Department would not have withheld part of the troops preparing for reinforcement and used them to strengthen the border area with France. In the final analysis, we are still afraid of France. Although it is only conducting military exercises in the border area, who can guarantee that this cannot be faked and become true? Therefore, the original plan to replace the standing army guarding the border with new troops mobilized was urgently stopped here. Of course, this also affects the Albanian battlefield on Simeon's side. In the final analysis, the army plans to take advantage of the time difference to gain some strategic depth first, so as to prevent Tus, Albania's only good port, from being threatened by the Ottoman army. After explaining the reason, Simeon began to assign his tasks. Your 8th Division is currently the most complete unit in Durrës, so your burden is not light. Next, you will step down as the defense officer of Durrës and lead the 8th Division to seize the Vala Pass. Come over. Remember, it doesn't matter if you can't grab it. You can also attract the enemy's attention to Vala. Remember not to cause too many casualties. As for the garrison task of Durrës, it will be handed over to the following 14th Division. Their other troops will also be transported here first, so that the 14th Division can be fully equipped as soon as possible. After listening to Simeon's task assignment, Major General Pascal asked again, "So when is the right time for our 8th Division to launch an offensive?" Simone thought for a moment before answering. 2 days later, no more than 3 days. You can use this time to let the engineers find a way to transport your heavy equipment ashore. I heard that the Ottoman army defending Walla has heavy artillery. You must pay attention to this. After hearing the time given by Simone, Major General Pascal knew what was going on. No matter what, heavy weapons must be brought up, otherwise this battle will be really difficult to fight. Of course, this is only a matter that he should be concerned about, but for Simeon, this change in the army is really nerve-wracking. At present, he only has 4 divisions, 2 mountain brigades, and some other ancillary troops. His strength is smaller than that of the enhanced Ottoman Macedonian Second Army. If you use inferior forces to attack a superior force, you must have an advantage in terms of the eliteness of the army and weapons and equipment. Otherwise the battle will be really difficult to fight. Moreover, the Ministry of War also gave a limited time, which completely made Simeon dance with handcuffs, and there were many restrictions. Fortunately, his side had an absolute advantage at sea, allowing him to have sufficient supplies. But now the only limitation for him is the port's loading and unloading capacity. This is why he wanted to go to the port first. Only if the port is clear can he be invincible. Following Simeon's order, the 8th Division began to withdraw from Durrës. They gathered at Siak between Durrës and the Walla Pass. Colonel Abriz, who kept a close eye on the Italian army's movements, immediately reported it to Tirana. After learning about the Italian army's movements, this also attracted the attention of Lieutenant General Javad Pasha, who had not yet left. So a large number of spies began to investigate Siak, trying to figure out the enemy's actions. However, these were of no use to Major General Pascal, because this time he rarely displayed his military strength with great fanfare, which made the Ottoman side confused as to what this operation was. But no matter what the operation is, there will eventually be a moment of revelation. After waiting for 2 days, he finally received the heavy artillery belonging to the 8th Division and the 3rd Army. Now the fully equipped 8th Division could measure the quality of the Walla defenders. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217, Tirana Outpost. Boom. An artillery shell fell behind the position and made a deafening explosion. At the same time, the explosion was accompanied by flying soil and pieces of wood. These debris were raised high by the explosion shockwave and finally fell everywhere. Many of them fell on the heads of the Ottoman officers and soldiers in the trenches, who were avoiding the shelling. Scenes like this can be seen everywhere on the Walla position. The artillery troops from the 8th Division are constantly bombarding the position with artillery. They continued to hit the defenders' positions with artillery shells one after another, putting heavy pressure on the 1st Brigade of the 16th Division defending the area. Of course, the defensive Ottoman army was not a vegetarian. The constant counterattacks from its artillery positions also prevented the 8th Division's artillery from bombarding the defenders' positions with all their strength. It seemed that the two sides were evenly matched, with back and forth, but Colonel Abriz had different opinions on this. On a position in Walla, Colonel Abriz, the commander of the position, had just observed the opponent's situation with a high-power telescope. The situation seemed to be favorable to him, but in fact it was very bad, because he found from the number and rate of fire of the opponent's artillery that the opponent was basically light artillery. Order. the artillery troops to pay attention to possible artillery suppression by the opponent. Just as Abulazi gave the order to the messengers, he immediately heard a different scream of artillery shells. No, the enemy's large caliber artillery is still a howitzer. As a qualified commander, he immediately judged the type of shell from the sound point. Before he finished speaking, he immediately felt an explosion behind the position. Judging from the position, it was an artillery position on his own side. Order immediately to move the artillery. Although this sentence came late, Abulazi still wanted to say that he hoped it would have some effect. After the defender's artillery position was suppressed by the opponent's artillery, there was a panic scene on the position. A large number of Ottoman officers and soldiers were busy loading the artillery onto the carriage and leaving here. However, some people were afraid of the shelling from Italy and chose to give up their beloved artillery and choose to protect themselves. Go back, everyone go back, and bring out the artillery. On one side of the position, the artillery commander was holding a pistol and leading his men to stop his men's embarrassing behavior and ordered them to go back and push out the artillery point. Faced with the majesty of the artillery commander and considering the power of the weapons in his hands, those who could not resist the fear in their hearts could only be driven back again. Facts have proved that the artillery commander's judgment was correct. Because the current artillery is set up and retreated, it needs to be reset after firing a shell. Therefore, the current artillery fire rate is very slow, and as a large caliber heavy artillery, its rate of fire is even slower. The 105 and 150mm howitzers currently firing at the Ottoman artillery position can only fire at a rate of 122 rounds per minute. In addition, the number of these artillery is not large, only more than 20, so the artillery position has suffered the losses still acceptable. Therefore, through the efforts of the Ottoman artillery, 5 of the 9 artillery pieces in this position were rescued, and the loss was not huge. However, after knowing that the caliber and range of the opponent's artillery are higher than their own, the artillerymen have to be more careful. Not every time they are caught, they are so lucky. Of course, this also resulted in the defender's artillery being unable to support the position at any time. After all, the enemy's heavy artillery was watching, which is understandable. Having said this, some people may ask, don't the Ottoman defenders have large caliber heavy artillery? What I can responsibly say here is that there is really no wall position here, not even in Tirana. Although the heavy artillery has a strong range and power, it is not easy to move, which will be a huge trouble for the 1st Brigade of the 16th Division, which currently does not intend to defend the area. This will cause the officers and soldiers of the 1st Brigade to be unable to take these heavy artillery with them when they retreat. Jinjiui's heavy artillery cannot be taken away, otherwise it will become a disposable consumable. How could a family be so prodigal? Even the British Empire's army, which had abundant financial resources, could not be so arrogant. Therefore, when the quantity and quality of artillery are inferior to those of the opponent, it is impossible to fight head-on with the enemy. The 1st Brigade has little resources and cannot be used in this way, so the artillery harassment tactic is a very suitable choice. The ensuing battle also reflected this, but also gave Italian artillery the advantage on the battlefield. After the artillery gained the upper hand, it was natural for the infantry to go into battle. This was also the consistent approach of all countries. In the current battles in Europe, the artillery battle basically starts at the beginning, and after the battle is over, the dominant side launches an infantry attack. Until the current lack of new weapons that changed tactics, the Italian army is no exception. So a regiment of infantry launched an attack on the enemy's position under the cover of artillery. Facing the offensive launched by the Italian army, the Ottoman army, which was on the defensive side, certainly would not let the enemy succeed like this. So a large number of officers and soldiers rushed to the position. Under the leadership of their officers, they fired at the incoming Italian troops with rifles in their hands. Snapped. An Ottoman soldier raised his rifle in the trench, aimed at an Italian soldier, and pulled the trigger. After only a second or two, the Italian soldier was still rushing towards the position. Knowing that he had not been hit, the soldier immediately loaded the bullet and aimed at the opponent again. Bang! Another shot, this time with results. The soldier's head was blown away, causing him to fall to the ground immediately in fright. Faced with such results, the Ottoman soldiers shook their heads and planned to choose a new target. But at this moment, a bullet passed through his head. With an expression of surprise and a hint of unwillingness, the Ottoman soldier fell in the trench point. Of course, his encounter was not the only one. This time, the M88 Carcano rifle in the hands of Italian soldiers showed amazing performance. Its excellent accuracy at 300 to 600 meters caused heavy casualties to the Ottoman army, which still adopted Preven's tactics. A large number of Ottoman soldiers were shot and killed by the more advanced M88 Carcano rifle when shooting at long distances with single-shot rifles. Although the Ottoman army was on the defensive side, the Italian army relied on their superiority in weapons to faintly suppress the firepower of the defenders' positions. One more thing needs to be said here. In the Pleven Defense War, which made the current Ottoman Minister of War, Field Marshal Osman Nuri Pasha famous, the Ottoman army used a long-range single-shot rifle shooting method and a close-range shooting method of repeating rifles. The Russian coalition forces suffered a heavy blow in Pleven. With the strength of one army, he held off the enemy's 300,000 strong army for 5 months. However, this was a tactic more than 10 years ago. At that time, repeating rifles equipped with magazines were indeed inferior to single-shot rifles in terms of accuracy. However, as times progressed, the Ottoman army still used old-fashioned tactics, so it was natural that they would suffer. What's more, this is Walla, not Preven Fortress. Therefore, under the fierce offensive of the Italian army, Colonel Abriz, who saw signs of instability in his position, could only let the artillery fire in an attempt to suppress the arrogance of the attacking troops. So under the bombardment of Ottoman artillery, the attacking Italian officers and soldiers had no choice but to retreat first. In the open space, they encountered enemy shelling. No one could bear the casualties, so retreating was the best choice. Of course, the Italian soldiers retreated, but this does not mean that the Italian army has nothing to do with them. The counterattack from the artillery caused considerable losses to the defenders' artillery point. When the final count was taken, Colonel Abulis had a constipated expression on his face because the loss was too great, especially for his own artillery. If he comes 2 or 3 more times, his troops will become pure infantry. This battle cannot continue like this. Immediately send someone to report to Major General Hashem in Tirana. We need reinforcement. I will revise the article for the last time today at 12 o'clock. I will not do this again in the future. I said so. No more anti-piracy. Everyone can choose as they please. So let's read the next chapter later. Chapter 218 Battle of Tirana, Part 1. Major General Hashem and Major General Halder in Tirana were very surprised by Colonel Abriz's request for help. It had only been a day, and the defensive Colonel Alabiz was already complaining. You must know that the 1st Brigade of the 16th Division had 5,000 troops. In addition, Major General Hashem assigned him to the artillery and other units, which is more than 6,000 people. Such a large number of troops were attacked by an enemy division and were beaten for help in just one day. This made the two men's already high evaluation of the Italian army rise to another level. I later learned that the combat effectiveness of the Italian army also fluctuated greatly. What should we do in the face of Colonel Abriz's request for help? But, since they asked for help, they had to take action anyway, so Major General Halder asked about Major General Hashem. After all, it was his troops who were defending in Walla. Major General Hashem, who was looking at the map, gritted his teeth and said after making some choices, let them pull back after a day of fighting. What, Major? General Hashem's words surprised Halder. You must know that retreating so quickly would have a huge impact on the morale of the army. It would make the soldiers think that the enemy was too strong, and they would fight for a day or two. Let the 16th Division won. The brigade withdrew. Despite this disadvantage, Major General Hashem still believed that withdrawing the 1st Brigade was the best option, because their purpose is not to defend Tirana, but to use the place to delay the Italians. So the purpose is different and the approach is also different. And more importantly, they are short of troops. They only have 2 divisions in Tirana, of which his 16 divisions have been deployed to Walla and Vatry respectively, and there are only 31 divisions in the city. If you want for reinforcement, 31 troops must be deployed, which is not conducive to the subsequent defense of Tirana. Although there are 3 regiments of local signs of recruits, the combat performance of these recruits is questionable. During the previous battle of the 21st Division in Durrus, the local recruits gave people a very unreliable feeling point. Therefore, instead of continuing to fight the enemy in Vala, after testing the quality of the enemy, it is better to ship the enemy in. No matter how hard Tirana is, it is worse than Vala. At least Tirana has a large number of buildings that can provide enough for 2 divisions. Zaozu and space, while Wala only has field fortifications, and they are temporary civil fortifications. How can this block the enemy point? In addition, the rifles used by the enemy perform well at medium and long distances, which is also one of Major General Hasham's considerations. So later, after Major General Hasham stated the factors he considered, Major General Halder also expressed his approval, after being silent for a while. After all, compared with reputation, maintaining strength to fight the next battle is more important. Their military strength does not support the wave war. If they can preserve their strength, it is a wise choice to stay in Tirana. Now that the two of them have decided, they will naturally notify Colonel Abriz in Walla Point, although Walla is only 16 kilometers away from Tirana. Considering the road conditions, the retreat can only be done at night. When the order from Tirana arrived, Colonel Abriz, the commander of Vala, also breathed a sigh of relief. My master just needs to block today for one more day. Immediately order the troops to increase their firepower without considering the issue of ammunition. The order from Colonel Abriz allowed the defenders to start using ammunition. This change immediately attracted the attention of Major General Pascal. The enemy is trying to escape. Faced with the changes in the garrison's position, the experienced Major General immediately spoke out what the enemy was thinking. So, what should we do? The Chief of Staff beside him immediately asked. Let the 4th Regiment cancel its combat mission and rest immediately until the order is given. It was obvious that Major General Pascal did not intend to let the enemy get his wish. He wanted to leave a deep impression on the enemy. However, the next battle continued, and the two armies continued to fight in Walla. Although the Ottoman army was at a disadvantage, after opening up their ammunition supply and increasing their firepower output, they still withstood the 8th Division's offensive. As for the attacking 8th Division, there was only one Durrus port in the rear, and a large number of troops needed to disembark at this port, so their ammunition was not as sufficient as their opponents. So, when the sun sets, the day's fighting is over. After seeing the enemy retreat, the garrison officers and soldiers were also busy resting and eating to replenish their physical strength. Of course, they didn't know about the retreat yet, but they were thinking about tomorrow's battle. Of course, this is only limited to officers and soldiers at the company and platoon level. As for the officers above him, they already knew the news, but considering the previous battle, they did not inform the following point. Now that the battle is over, and night has fallen, there is nothing to say, so the matter will naturally be announced. Therefore, when they learned that they were about to return to Tirana, the officers and soldiers of the 1st Brigade were very happy. Of course, the troops that retreat first are already ready, and the logistics troops are the priority to retreat. The artillery came next, and then the infantry. Moreover, the retreat was not done in one fell swoop, but in batches. The 2nd Regiment, which had suffered more losses, came first, and then the 1st Regiment. The Chief of Staff led a group of staff officers and clearly arranged the entire retreat plan. As for Colonel Alabis, the brigade commander, he needed smart troops to fight during the day, and waited until dusk to take a closer look at the plan. After watching the logistics troops leave, Colonel Abulazi immediately spoke. Chief of Staff, you can take the headquarters and the artillery and withdraw together. I will take the regiment and withdraw last. Efficiency is important on the battlefield, and the Chief of Staff is not a mother-in-law, so after agreeing, he immediately led the rest of the headquarters and joined the retreating artillery team. By the time the artillery troops withdrew, it was already past 11 o'clock in the evening. The reason why the time is so fast is that, although the first two do not have many troops, they have a lot of supplies, so they need a lot of vehicles. And in the dark environment, it is impossible to go very fast. Since it was now empty, it was naturally the 2nd Regiment's turn to retreat. So under the leadership of the commander of the 2nd Regiment, its officers and soldiers marched toward the rear in company units. After doing this, Colonel Abriz was about to order a regiment to prepare to retreat, when a burst of gunfire attracted his attention. What's going on? Go and have a look. Gunfire coming out at this time is definitely not a good thing. You must know that most of the troops are gone now, and this is the time when the position is most empty. The guard quickly entered the night with his order, but he came back within 2 minutes. Not only did he come back, he also brought a signal soldier. The signal soldier's words greatly surprised him. What? The enemy is attacking at night. After hearing the words of the signal corpsman, Colonel Abriz immediately felt the seriousness of the matter. After taking a look at the large army that had already left, he turned around and ordered, "Inform the commander of the 1st Regiment immediately and order him to stop preparations for retreat. I will guard the position with him." That night, gunfire rang out in Wada throughout the night. At dawn, hundreds of Ottomans fled from Wada under the guidance of the sun, but Colonel Abriz was not seen among them. As for the news about Colonel Alabi's, no one knew, but someone later picked up his gun at the position. Chapter 219 Battle of Tirana, Part 2. The news of Colonel Abriz's disappearance is sad news for Major General Hashim. Of course, what makes him even more worried is that the 1st Brigade suffered a lot of losses at present. There are only about 4,000 troops left in the brigade. In addition to 800 casualties in the 2-day battle with the Italian 8th Division, the remaining casualties came from the retreat at night. Of course, Colonel Abriz, who is missing among them, must bear a great deal of responsibility. After all, he was the commander of the unit, so there was no way he could justify such heavy casualties. Of course, considering that he is missing, Major General Hashim will not be able to pursue the case further. For him, the most important thing at the moment is to withdraw the 2nd Brigade in Vacheli. However, compared with the 1st Brigade in Werla, Vacheri was not attacked by the Italian army because it was on the road farther away from Ders and Tirana. This also gave the 2nd Brigade enough time to evacuate. Major General Hashim has already ordered the 2nd Brigade to return to Tirana with its troops. As for the 1st Brigade, its Chief of Staff will temporarily take over for the time being. Letting it recover first will also be conducive to the subsequent defense work. Therefore, the 1st Brigade got 2 precious days of rest after returning to Tirana. As for Lieutenant General Simeon Indurus, he became more confident about his plan after receiving the news that the 8th Division had captured Wala in 2 days and opened the road to Tirana. Apart from the performance of the 8th Division, there were of course other reasons that gave him such confidence. The most important reason was that in addition to the fact that all the 14th Division had landed, the 4th Mountain Brigade had also landed. Being able to send the 14th Division and the 4th Mountain Brigade ashore within 4 days was naturally inseparable from the hard work of the engineering troops. Now that Simeon held 2 divisions and 1 brigade with a force of 40,000 men, he was even more confident in capturing Tirana. After all, in Tirana, the Ottomans only had 2.5 divisions and less than 40,000 people. They did not know that the enemy's 21st Division had been withdrawn. Not only does it have an advantage in strength, but it also has an absolute advantage in equipment. Currently, there are 67 artillery pieces with a caliber of 100mm or more ashore in Durrës, including 31 artillery pieces with a caliber of 150mm or more. As for the opponent, according to intelligence, it has 24 artillery pieces with a caliber of more than 100mm, all of which are 105mm howitzers. There are no cannons with a caliber of more than 150mm and a longer range. The reason for this is still the same problem. The Ottoman army did not intend to defend here, so the heavier large caliber and cannons, which are very unsuitable for transfer, had no choice but to not carry them. After all, compared with lightweight artillery under 100mm, large caliber and cannons all start at least 1.5 tons. In this era where only animal power operates, they cannot be considered at all. There is no railway in Tirana. Of course, the time to attack Tirana is not yet ripe, because we need to be more prepared. Among other things, we need to have enough ammunition. In the past, the port was rushing to transport personnel and equipment, so ammunition transportation was ranked behind. Of course, this refers to the scale of ammunition required for large wars, and small and medium-sized battles do not require so much preparation. Simeon currently has a goal, and is preparing to occupy Vacheri first. Because according to his judgment, after capturing Vala, The Ottomans should not continue to stay here, because the road to Tirana has been opened. Soon the intelligence from the investigation confirmed his judgment. Vachili's enemies are packing their bags. It seems that the enemies are not stupid either. Seeing the latest information from Vachili, Simone muttered to himself, then, shall we send the 14th Division there? Faced with Chief of Staff Bartlett's words, Simeon thought about it and spoke. Forget it. It's not appropriate to send another 14th Division. Let the 4th Mountain Brigade pass. It just so happens that the terrain in Vachili is also suitable for the 4th Mountain Brigade. Bartlett also agrees with Simeon's words. The terrain of Vachili is indeed slightly more complex than that of Wurla, which also results in the road conditions there being inferior to Wurra. Letting the Mountain Brigade pass by will give full play to the lightness of its equipment. Besides, retaining the strength of the 14th Division will make it better able to cope with various situations in the future. Following Simone's order, the officers and soldiers of the 4th Mountain Brigade, who had not fully recovered less than 2 days after disembarking from the ship, immediately packed up their luggage and prepared to set off. After receiving the order, Colonel Ellens, the commander of the 4th Mountain Brigade, also immediately arranged the departure of the troops. Let the 1st Regiment set off first, the 2nd Regiment after, and the headquarters and affiliated troops at the end. Following his order, the 4th Mountain Brigade set off one after another. Of course, there was basically no fighting in the 4th Mountain Brigade on its way to Vachili this time. Even if there is, it is just a sporadic spontaneous action by local Albanians. However, these battles may be more appropriately called sweeps, and they cannot delay the 4th Mountain Brigade at all. In the evening of the same day, Simeon received a message from Brigadier Ellens that they had occupied Vachili Point. When the 4th Mountain Brigade occupied Vachili, in the headquarters of the 2nd Macedonian Army, Lieutenant General Javad Pasha had just received a piece of intelligence, and his face was ugly. Damn it, the Italians confused us with their actions. That's right. The information about the Italian army being restrained by the French exercises was finally known to the Ottomans. Lieutenant General Javad Pasha, who received this telegram, had mixed emotions. This telegram came at a really bad time. If he could have known it 4 or 5 days in advance, he would have had other ideas. As for now, this is really bad management, because he had just received that Vola and Vachili had been abandoned, which put the garrison stationed in Tirana on an absolute defensive footing. If you want to change this situation, you must increase your troops, which is contrary to the policy he set at the beginning. Perhaps seeing Javad Pasha's hesitation, Major General Karaman, the Chief of Staff of the Army Group, asked, then when the enemy attacks Tirana, can we send a surprise wave of reinforcement to prevent the enemy from being so presumptuous? Lieutenant General Javad Pasha certainly understood the meaning of the Chief of Staff's words and wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to mobilize troops to give the Italians a hard blow, and it was not unwise to choose it when the enemy launched an attack on Tirana. Javad Pasha was naturally moved, but after carefully observing the map, he gave up the idea. Chief of Staff, although your idea is good, it is not easy to achieve such an effect. First of all, how to hide it from the enemy's sight, and even if we hide it, how can we defeat the enemy quickly instead of being entangled by it? Besides, Lieutenant General Javad Pasha asked several questions in succession, leaving Major General Karaman at a loss as to how to answer them. Seeing the look of the Chief of Staff, Javad Pasha could tell that he was just like himself, wanting to use this news to gain something. But he had not calculated the risks involved. Let's still prepare as before, continue to strengthen our positions, and wait for the enemy's attack. It's much more difficult for us on the transportation line than our opponents. Seeing that this news would not bring him any benefits, Lieutenant General Javad Pasha was certainly not willing to give in. However, the risk involved in drastically changing the plan was too high, and it was not worth it. The cautious Javad Pasha, as the commander of the army, of course needs to consider all aspects, so it is better to be cautious. However, although Lieutenant General Javad Pasha chose to be cautious, the Italian side was not cautious at all. After 5 days of preparation, Simeon led the 8th and 14th Divisions and most of the 4th Mountain Brigade to the outside of Tirana Point. The first decent battle between Italy and Turkey was about to break out. Chapter 220 Battle of Tirana, Part 2. Under the sunshine in April, the temperature in Tirana is moderate, making it a perfect day for travel point. But now, the atmosphere in Tirana is quite wrong. Point in the trenches built outside Tirana, Ottoman soldiers were holding weapons and observing the scene in the distance. Point in the distance, there is the position of the Italian army. The incoming Italian army surrounded Tirana on both sides of the southwest, and the cannons it set up were able to penetrate into the city of Tirana. Point as for the local residents of Tirana, most of them have fled Tirana, which is about to become a battlefield. A small number of people, except for those who were drafted and stayed voluntarily, are the lonely elderly people with inconvenient legs and feet. Point as for these old people, the commanders of both sides will not take them into consideration, because this is war now. Both sides are almost ready, and the war is about to begin. Point in the Italian army's headquarters, as the commander of this battle, Simeon was determining their respective tasks with his subordinates. Major General Pascal, after receiving my order, your 8th Division will launch an attack on the Kobuk and Lake areas in the west of the city. You must let the enemy feel the pressure you are putting on them. Although Simeon didn't say it explicitly, Pascal had fought a lot, and he could tell at once that this was for him to act as a cover, so the 14th Division must be the main attack. Next point. Although Pascal was a little unhappy, since soldiers regard obedience as their bounden duty, they had no choice but to comply. As ordered, our 8th Division promises to resolutely complete the mission. As Pascal's superior, Simeon still didn't know what his subordinates were thinking, but he really couldn't hand over the main attack task to him this time. The reason is that the 8th Division has been fighting all the time. Its losses are not small, and it cannot be used as the main attack point. So Simeon acted as if he didn't hear what he said, and then gave the task to the commander of the 14th Division, Major General Eddie Brazzo. Next to him, Major General Brazzo is a short middle-aged man. His dark skin shows that he has been exposed to wind and Sunday. Major General Brazzo, your 14th Division immediately launched a fierce attack on the enemy after the 8th Division started the battle. You must move quickly. I will assign artillery to you to help you open the gap as soon as possible. Don't worry, Commander. The 14th Division will never let you down. Major General Brazzo's answer made Simeon very satisfied. He looked at him and nodded to express his approval. Then he turned to look at Colonel Ahrens, commander of the 4th Mountain Brigade. Colonel Ahrens, your 4th Brigade has always been famous in the army for its mountain reconnaissance. This time I need your brigade to do a good job in reconnaissance and backup work, so that we cannot be attacked from behind. Yes, what Simeon is most worried about after launching the battle is the enemy's other troops of the 2nd Macedonian Army in the Dinara Mountains. Therefore, this reconnaissance and surveillance is very important, as it is related to the life and death of the 3rd Army in his hands. And the 4th Mountain Brigade happens to be very good in this aspect, so there is no reason for him not to use the other party. Point. Of course, it is impossible to send out all the 4th Mountain Brigade. The strength of 2 battalions is enough to cover a radius of 40 kilometers. The movements of every plant and tree here will not be hidden from him. Don't worry, Lieutenant General Simeon. No Ottoman is more capable of sneaking past our sights. After assigning tasks to various ministries, a brutal battle will follow. Point. Of course, as the vanguard, the artillery has its duty. Point. This time Simeon concentrated all his heavy artillery and launched a fierce bombardment on the army positions. As soon as he took action this time, Simeon played heroically all day long. Point. It was now the 2nd day of shelling. Boom, boom, boom. Heavy artillery shells from Italy made the Ottoman soldiers hiding in the trenches tremble. The explosion of tens of kilograms of artillery shells was extremely powerful, enough to cause huge damage to the Ottoman soldiers in the trenches. If the distance is too close, even if you don't get hit, you will still be shocked to death. Point. This is what the Ottoman officers and soldiers saw with their own eyes, and there were more than 1 or 2 cases where they were killed by explosions at close range. The soldiers who went to check could see these dead soldiers who seemed to be asleep, with dried blood flowing from their eyes, nose and mouth, which was simply too scary. Point. Of course, the power of heavy artillery is not limited to killing people. Its strong fortress is also the focus of its bombardment. If the fortress in Tirana was built like various fortresses of the great powers, then the heavy artillery in Simone's hand would not be enough. Unfortunately, the fortresses in the hands of the Ottomans were all temporary constructions, many of which were converted from civilian buildings. Although it performed well on regional lieutenant colonel caliber artillery, in the face of large caliber heavy artillery, it was like paper. Nearly 70% of the fortresses built by the Ottoman garrisoned 16th Division and 31st Division on the southwest side were lost, most of which were destroyed by heavy artillery. These powerful heavy artillery, guided by the artillery school's balloon, named the fortresses, that were obviously different from other houses one by one. These are new era weapons that are different from the Turkish-Russian war. They taught the Ottoman army, whose thinking was still in the period of the Turkish-Russian war, a good lesson on what modern warfare is. After seeing the shelling effect from behind and being satisfied with it, Simeon picked up the field phone he had set up and dialed the 8th Division headquarters. Major General Pascal, the 8th Division is ready to attack. Following Simeon's order, the 8th Division immediately threw a regiment of soldiers and launched an attack on the defenders. The heavy artillery bombardment continued to the rear. It was obvious that this was to block the enemy's reinforcement. The news that the infantry attack was finally launched in Italy also made the defenders breathe a sigh of relief. If it continues to explode like this without fighting back, the defenders and soldiers will collapse. How can there be such a prodigal way of fighting? A bombardment can last for more than a day. Of course, you have to tell them what it means at this time. There will be artillery attacks for a week in the future, and the other party will definitely treat you as a fool. As the Italian army entered the battle, the battlefield finally entered a familiar environment. The officers and soldiers on both sides used their rifles to fire desperately at their opponents. Of course, it is time to look at the performance of the two rifles. At this point, the Italian officers and soldiers are completely victorious because they all hold the M88 Carcano rifle. As for the rifles of the Ottoman army, they are mixed and hairy. There are rifles such as the SYR 1874, Zarsipo, and its improved glass, which can be said to be a hardship for logistics officials. The caliber of these guns alone is a headache. Of course, for the Ottoman army, as long as it can shoot and hit the enemy, it is a good gun, and they have no capital to choose. Just as the two parties were fighting fiercely in the west, suddenly more violent gunfire erupted from the south. As the commander of the 14th Division, Major General Brazzo was able to mobilize a brigade of troops in one move, which was truly a generous act. His unconventional approach caused great suffering to the defenders in the west, and he even directly sent a message to the two defender commanders asking for reinforcement. Faced with such a situation, the two Major Generals Hashim and Halder could not know that something was wrong. The two of them didn't waste much time talking and immediately sent out the 1st Brigade of the 16th Division. So a larger scale battle broke out in the west of the city. The officers and soldiers of both sides devoted themselves selflessly to the battle, fighting bloody battles for their respective missions. There is still a chapter of Tirana plot, and then we need to change places, so don't wait impatiently. Chapter 221 Battle of Tirana, End. Liguri walked carefully through the rubble, his eyes vigilantly observing the movements around him, ready to use his rifle to counterattack any enemies that might emerge from the surroundings. Liguri came from Florence. As the second son of his family, Liguri accepted the call of the country without hesitation and became an honorable soldier. After a short period of recruit training, he was assigned to the 31st Division 2nd Brigade, 1st Regiment, 3rd Battalion and 4th Company, to become the company's messenger. He is now carrying out the instructions given to him by the company commander, Captain Bobby, and conveying orders to the 2nd Platoon. Liguri carefully walked through a half-collapsed building. After realizing that nothing was going on, he immediately rushed across the empty street with a quick stride, and then hid in a corner to calm down a little. The reason for him to do this is simple. The open space is too dangerous. This is a warning from veterans and a lesson learned through blood, and such a living example has appeared before his eyes. Wolf, who had been with him for more than 3 months, and was also a messenger, was shot in an open place. Fortunately, he survived and was sent back to Durrës, and the real Liguri certainly didn't want to have such an encounter, so he had to be careful. Although this cannot be called the Laotian Tiger's Den, he must treat it as the Long Ten Tiger's Den. This is the way to survive, that the veteran taught him. Point. After taking a short rest, Liguri continued walking forward. He passed through an alley and then turned into a diagonal alley. When he came out of here, he breathed a sigh of relief because he had reached his destination. Liguri, here to deliver the order again. On a building, someone called him. Liguri knew him. He was Pock from the 2nd platoon and the 3rd class. Like him, he was from Florence, Pork, whereas Lieutenant Forley, facing the fellow villagers. Liguri immediately asked about the position of the 2nd platoon leader. After all, the mission was important. The ensign is resting. Come in. After knowing the position of the 2nd platoon leader, Liguri immediately rushed over. After he entered through the door, Lieutenant Forley, who still looked sleepy, appeared in front of him. Liguri, why did the company commander send you here this time? After seeing Liguri, Forley, who had a shaggy beard and a mess of hair, did not forget to yawn widely while saying hello. Captain, Papal orders you to allocate half of your troops to cooperate with the 3rd platoon to capture Telda Square. What? We are going to hit Telda Square. After hearing what Liguri said, Forley almost jumped up as if his butt was pricked by a needle. Because the location of the square is very important. It is at the connection between the west and south of the city. In order to prevent the 14th Division and the 8th Division from connecting together, the Ottoman army placed a battalion here and equipped it with 4 small artillery. Previously, their battalion tried twice and failed both times. So after hearing Liguri's words, it's no wonder Forley jumped. Second, Lieutenant Forley, this is the company commander's order, and I won't let you die. As a messenger, Liguri has the company headquarters at his back, so he is naturally more informed than Forley, the platoon leader. An hour ago, a unit of the 8th Division had already reached Salco Street. Now they plan to attack Telda Square and need our assistance. And this time, not only our 4th company, but other companies will also mobilize troops. After Liguri's explanation, Forley's expression became much better now, but he still couldn't help but complain. Damn it, I was planning to clean up the rats with round hats in the area in the next 2 days, but now it seems I can't do that. Don't worry, if you have time, you will have time when Telda Square is taken down. Liguri didn't know that the defenders of Telda Square they were discussing had smelled danger. The Ottoman commander guarding here had asked his superiors for help, and now he was anxiously waiting for the messenger to bring back the news. Not long after, he saw the messenger he sent rushing back panting. Battle commander, the regimental commander told you to retreat. There is no need to defend here. Upon hearing the news brought back by the messenger, the commander breathed a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted, and he immediately called another messenger. Immediately send me an order for everyone to retreat in order according to the number of each company. Move quickly. Situations like this for the garrison occurred frequently in the battles over the past few days. The Ottoman troops guarding Tirana would seek to retreat once they sensed that the situation was dire. Although this allowed them to lose nearly half of the city in 3 days, their casualty rate was well controlled. As the commanders of the city's garrison, the 2 major generals Hashim and Halder were still satisfied. At least their strength was well preserved. At present, the command system of the Ottoman garrison has been moved to the new headquarters located in the northeast corner of the city. The headquarters was just moved here today. The old headquarters in the center of the city could no longer be used because the Italian army was approaching, so we had to give up. Of course, the old headquarters converted from the city hall will not give the Italians free money. A battalion of defenders has already been stationed in it. They will rely on the strong buildings of the city hall to deal a heavy blow to the enemy. As for the new headquarters, the 2 major generals were discussing the war situation. We can't give up on the Lyman Street side yet. Let them hold on for 1 more day, and then retreat to the defense area of your 31st Division's 3rd Regiment. That's no problem. I'll send a message to the 3rd Regiment and ask them to take care of it. To then continue to discuss which positions needed to be held today and which positions needed to be abandoned. Basically, those with large casualties and unimportant locations will be considered first, while those locations with important locations and strong troops will be slowly abandoned. Anyway, the overall approach is to exchange space for time. Of course, this needs to be filled with the lives of officers and soldiers of both armies. Simeon, as the commander of the attacking side, was also very clear about the actions of the Ottoman army. Although he was very dissatisfied with this, considering the strength, equipment, morale and other factors of the two armies, he could only choose to acquiesce. After all, the manpower consumption in siege warfare cannot be small, unless the defenders collapse without a fight point. But it is obvious that the Ottoman army will not be able to defeat without a fight, and there will be no gains to be made. So what can be done? We can only fight a war of attrition with the defenders. Of course, there are differences in a war of attrition. As an excellent commander, Simeon has his own understanding even when fighting a war of attrition. What advantages does your side have? Of course, in addition to morale, you can also take advantage of equipment advantages. In view of the previous role of small and medium caliber artillery in urban warfare, this time he distributed both small and medium caliber artillery to all units. Even company level troops can have direct support from small caliber artillery such as 37 and 57 mm, which can be said to maximize the firepower of frontline troops, and this approach seems to be very good. Many Italian officers and soldiers who attacked used the advantage of artillery to open gaps, and then expanded the results and shook the confidence of the defenders. But even so, the Italian army still fought very hard. Although it was not a battle for control with the Ottoman defenders house by house, it could at least be regarded as a battle for the entire streets and alleys. However, this kind of competition consumes a lot of ammunition, morale and other aspects. So basically the two armies grit their teeth and hold on. Of course, this situation is difficult for the Italian army and even more difficult for the Ottoman army. After all, they do not have an advantage, whether in firepower, equipment, or numbers. After 7 days of fighting, the Ottoman army finally withdrew from Tirana and retreated to Elbasan. The Battle of Tirana lasted for a week. The two armies invested a total of nearly 100,000 people, including local recruits recruited by the Ottomans, and the Italian side eventually won. However, the price of this victory was not small at all. There were 7,478 injured, 2,835 killed, 312 missing, and over 10,000 casualties. Of course, Italian casualties were not small, and the Ottomans, as the defeated party, were not easy either. It suffered 8,421 wounded, 5,179 killed, 3,891 captured and missing, and more than 17,000 casualties were captured and missing, which was also a huge blow to this unit. But in any case, this battle not only allowed the world to see the combat effectiveness of the Italian army, somewhat exaggerated, but also allowed the world to see the capabilities of the Ottoman army. Of course, the end of the Battle of Tirana does not mean anything. This is just the first large-scale and decent battle between the two armies. The road ahead is still long and there will be too much fighting time. Although other European countries may not care much, there is an extraordinary response within the Balkans. Chapter 222 Anxious Balkan countries. Belgrade, located at the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers, is the capital of newly born Serbia. Although Serbia has only been independent for 12 years, this country is very ambitious, and its relations with the surrounding Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania are not good. The only one that is slightly better may be the Principality of Negro, which is still separated from the Ottoman territory. In just over 10 years, Serbia has made trouble for its neighbors, which is considered very powerful. Of course, this is not the original intention of the Serbian government, but as a saying goes, if the situation is compelling, it must be done as a last resort. The poor relations with Austria-Hungary are mainly due to the nationalism in Serbia. Due to the large number of Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the people of the country very much hope to merge with Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, Bosnia and Herzegovina is currently in the hands of Austria-Hungary, and the dream of the Serbian government is shattered. The relationship with Bulgaria is poor, which was caused by the Serbian-Bulgarian War. The other two countries have intentions for the Macedonian region, and a sense of competition is also mixed in. As for Romania, the relationship between Serbia and Russia is more involved. Romania, as an anti-Russian country, certainly does not want to see a Russian younger brother behind it. Of course, Serbia can still be active after offending its neighbors on all sides. Naturally, it has a backer, and its backer is the famous Tsarist Russia. Originally, Tsarist Russia supported Bulgaria the most in the Balkans, but then there was a crisis in Bulgaria due to a change of kings. The Russians, who were somewhat disgraced in Bulgaria, focused their attention on Serbia. Since you have received benefits from Russia, you need to contribute to Russia. So later there was a war between Serbia and Bulgaria. Of course, this war has passed, but isn't this a new war emerging? It is still the war between the Ottoman Empire and the Italians that it has been peeping at. The Serbian government, which feels uncomfortable if it cannot get some benefits, is of course eager to get involved and get a share of the pie. Because Serbia had received the news, the Principality of Montenegro was pulled onto the chariot by Italy and was promised generous rewards. This makes the Serbian people greedy, and they want to get off the field immediately and join in. However, if you want to participate, you need the consent of the Italians who initiated the war. Otherwise, you will not get any benefits, even if you rush in recklessly. Grujic, who is the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Serbia, is entertaining this distinguished guest in the Prime Minister's office. At least for the moment, he is an honored guest to the Serbian government. Your Excellency Mayor, our country is very happy to see Italy launch a war against the evil Ottoman country. To this end, our country has held several large-scale demonstrations in support of your country. This shows that our people's support for Italy has. I also ask that your envoy consider your enthusiasm for lying on the rails, so that our country can join the just war to liberate the Balkan people oppressed by the Ottomans. That's right. In front of Prime Minister Grujic is Italy's special envoy in the Balkans, Mir. He sat in front of the Prime Minister of Serbia and watched Prime Minister Grujic's wonderful performance. His expressions and movements were so real that, if you were someone who didn't know who he was, you might have believed him. The Prime Minister from the Serbian People's Radical Party has a character as radical as the name of his party. For the benefit of Serbia, he can do whatever it takes. Although this is a good thing for Serbia, its unwillingness to adapt makes it less effective. Of course this is the Serbians' choice, and it has nothing to do with Mayor. However, the Salvia Prime Minister's thoughts could not be hidden from his eyes. Thank you for your country's warm hospitality. Your people support our country's disciplinary war against the Ottoman Empire. Here, on behalf of our government, I would like to express my highest gratitude. However, your country's participation in the war is of great importance and I cannot make this decision. The decision still needs to be reported to Rome, and it will be decided by our country. Mayor's words were obviously evasive. If he really wanted to contact me, he would have contacted her long ago. He could have waited until now. However, although it was an excuse, Prime Minister Grujic still held some expectations. I hope your country can decide, as soon as possible. Our 200,000 troops are eager to fight with your country. 200,000 more, after mobilizing all militia reserves. Although Maya was a little disdainful in her heart, she did a good job in appearance. Don't worry about this. I will definitely bring your country's urgent mood to you. After the two talked for a while, Prime Minister Grujic personally sent him out of the Prime Minister's office. After the carriage carrying Maya left, Grujic's face became unhappy, and then he complained softly at a volume that only he could hear. These damn Italians. But his troubles didn't end there. Shortly after he returned to the office, the door was suddenly knocked open. The person who came in was Colonel Mitisic, who was in charge of Serbian intelligence work. Prime Minister, we have just received intelligence that the Bulgarians are secretly mobilizing, and many of the troops they have recruited are equipped with Italian weapons. Colonel Mikioki's words immediately silenced the office, and then only a bang was heard, and a piece of porcelain was broken into pieces and scattered on the ground. Prime Minister Grujic's angry voice immediately sounded. These damn Italians would rather find Bulgaria than give our country a chance. Damn Italians. I wish you a disastrous defeat by the Ottomans in Macedonia. This news made the Prime Minister say that he would rather see the Ottomans win than the Italians. You can imagine how much this touched him. As for how the news of Bulgaria's mobilization was known to the Serbians, it is not difficult. After all, it is impossible to hide something like mobilization. After all, this involves too much, and there are too many people handling it in terms of personnel, materials, transportation, etc. Who can guarantee that everyone will not speak out? Not even the powerful British Empire or Germany, which is famous for its discipline, can do this. In fact, Bulgaria has been secretly mobilizing for half a month. Being able to conceal it for half a month is already very commendable. Point of course, now is not the time to praise them, because if Serbia can get the news, so can other countries. In Athens, Greece, Prime Minister Trikoupis said the same thing as Serbian Prime Minister Grujic. Are these Italians blind? Isn't the strength of the Kingdom of Greece worthy of their attention? As Prime Minister Trikoupis, whose mission is to revive Greece, he also had certain expectations after learning that war broke out between Italy and the Ottomans. Because there are currently too many Greeks living in the Ottoman Balkan territories, in Crete, the Aegean Islands, Epirus, and Macedonia. This is what Greece covets this time. The Italians did not take Greece to play, which was very unhappy for Greece. Of course, the strength of the two countries also made Greece have no choice but to hide its displeasure in its heart. Since you don't bring it, there's nothing much to say, just fight it yourself. It turns out that you, Italy, did not take us, Greece, but actually took Bulgaria and the Principality of Montenegro. What do you mean? You look down on me. The current Prime Minister Trikoupis does have this idea. Of course, driven by this idea, Prime Minister Trikoupis had an idea. Of course, don't get me wrong, Greece cannot join the Ottoman side. He is not crazy yet. But he wants a country that should be equally disappointed with himself, Serbia. Maybe one country is not strong enough, so find another one. The first two countries are located in the south and the north respectively. I believe that the combined power is definitely greater than 2. Just as he said, Trikoupis immediately recruited a confidant and asked him to find the Serbian ambassador to Greece. He had something to discuss with him. Chapter 223, Istanbul's plan. Putting aside the thoughts of Greek Prime Minister Trikoupis, let's first talk about the impact of Bulgaria's mobilization. Since both Serbia and Greece have received the information, of course the Ottoman Empire as the country involved has also received the information. However, thanks to its excellent intelligence work, Osman received the news 5 days later than the two countries faced with the unexpected situation. The Ottoman monarchs and ministers were shocked and quickly began to discuss countermeasures. How is the situation in Bulgaria? It was rare that a mid-second, His Majesty the Sultan was the first to ask, "Your Majesty, I just asked the Bulgarian envoy in Istanbul. He said that this was Bulgaria's natural reaction to this war. In order to prevent the war from spreading to Bulgaria, they carried out a small-scale mobilization. The number of people was not large, only about 40,000 people." Halim Pasha, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, responded to the inquiry from His Majesty the Sultan. However, the foreign minister's answer made a mid-second smile. Do you believe the Bulgarians' answer? If you don't believe it, the Bulgarians must have some kind of intention, especially when there are a large number of Italian weapons in their army. We can't believe their words. Obviously, the words of the Bulgarians cannot be deceived even by the children of Istanbul. However, even though the Bulgarians' intentions were known, the matter was still difficult to handle. Just open the map and you can see how critical Bulgaria's location was to the Ottoman Empire. Bulgaria's location happened to threaten the security of the Ottoman Empire's Aegean corridor. This corridor is a key link between Istanbul and Macedonia, Albania and other Balkan territories. As long as this corridor is cut off, the armies in Macedonia, Albania and other places will lose contact with Istanbul. This will be even more dangerous, especially when the Italians still control the sea. Therefore, under such circumstances, the Ottoman high-level officials were so concerned about Bulgaria's actions. This was simply holding a sharp knife to Osman's vital points. However, in the face of Bulgaria's hostility, the Ottoman leaders are not fools. Nuri Pasha, who was the Minister of War, then spoke. Can the government find a way to remedy this situation? What? To save? Although Nuri Pasha didn't say it, everyone present knew what it meant. Facing the words of the old marshal, Foreign Minister Halim Pasha thought for a while and replied, "This is unlikely. We all know Bulgaria's intentions. They want all of Macedonia and Western Thrace. There is no way we can give it to them." After hearing what Halim Pasha said, the old marshal shook his head and said, "You misunderstood me. I meant talking to the Bulgarians. I think Harem Pasha, you should know better than me about negotiations. In fact, just a small issue will take many days of wrangling. Nuri Pasha's words were so explicit that those present did not understand what he meant. This was to delay time and give the Ottoman Empire more time. How long, then, does the Marshal think the conversation should last? The person who asked this question was the Grand Vizier Kamal Pasha. After all, it was not just diplomats who were willing to compromise with the Bulgarians, but also required the cooperation of other departments facing the Grand Vizier's inquiry. Nuri Pasha spoke naturally. Of course, the longer the better, but it should be at least a week. The old Marshal gave a minimum of 1 week, which was also the minimum number of days he recognized. Because if you want to protect the narrow coastal channel of Western Thrace, you need a lot of troops currently. There are more than 200,000 troops in Macedonia and other Ottoman-owned Balkan regions. Although this seems like a lot, it is still not enough. Because Osman has too many things to do. It is necessary to defend against Italian attacks, protect the coastline, and provide necessary surveillance forces for other Balkan countries, and to retain sufficient mobile forces. So it would be good to be able to mobilize 40,000 people locally. How could a 40,000 strong force block a possible Bulgarian attack? Although Bulgaria has a small population, it is still possible to mobilize more than 100,000 people from its population of more than 3 million, which requires the deployment of troops from Istanbul. However, Istanbul is the capital city, and deploying more troops will give the Bulgarians a chance to seize the city. Besides, there are currently only 60,000 troops in Istanbul, so it is not suitable to mobilize too many troops. So the only solution at the moment is to mobilize troops from Asian territories. Of course, before this, War Minister Nuri Pasha had already done this again. However, the number of troops mobilized is not large. Only more than 60,000 troops have been mobilized from Asia, and more than 60,000 more are on the way. It took about a week for these people to arrive. With these 60,000 people plus the 40,000 people that Macedonia can provide, and another 20,000 people transferred from Istanbul, there are 120,000 people for defense. Although it is not enough, it is almost enough if it only performs defensive tasks. This is why Nuri Pasha asked for 7 days. Faced with Nuri Pasha's request, Kamal Pasha glanced at Halim Pasha, the foreign minister, and finally said, "Then our government will try our best to delay it for a week." After receiving the assurance from the government, the old marshal no longer had any problems. Although there are still issues such as ordnance and supplies, it is not appropriate to discuss them here at the moment. After solving the army's problem, Kamal Pasha turned to look at the almost transparent person in this meeting, Navy Minister Hardman Pasha. Yes, Hardman Pasha, who is in charge of the Ottoman Navy, really seems to be a transparent man, but this time he cannot be transparent. Hardman Pasha, can your navy go to sea to protect the empire's shipping lanes in the Aegean Sea? If Kamal Pasha's words were placed in Italy, they would definitely be an insult to the other party. Not being asked to duel on the spot was considered a good-tempered admiral. It's just that when this sentence is applied to the current Ottoman Navy, it does not mean to insult the other party at all. The dispatch of the aging navy was also the reason why Kamal Pasha wanted to speed up the delivery of supplies to the Macedonian region. Although Nuri Pasha promised that the Ottoman army would be able to make defensive arrangements in just 1 week, there were always surprises. In order to prevent the possibility of being cut off in the event of an accident, it is always good to transport more supplies. Facing the question of Grand Vizier Kamal Pasha, Hardman Pasha stood up and spoke impassionately. "Your Majesty, everyone, although the situation of our navy is not very good, as long as your Majesty orders it, the Imperial Navy will still fight to the death to fulfill your Majesty's request." Hardman Pasha's words made several others secretly curse at the old cunning guy. This is the same as saying nothing, and puts the choice in the hands of His Majesty the Sultan. But his plan failed. Faced with Hardman Pasha's words, Sultan Hamid II glanced at the Minister of Navy, and then turned his eyes to Grand Vizier Kamal Pasha. "What does the government need from the Navy?" Facing the Sultan's inquiry, Kamal Pasha quickly came up with the idea of using ships to transport supplies. Kamal Pasha's words made the respected Sultan think for 3 seconds. "Since the Navy is needed, let the Navy do it." He had no scruples about the admiral standing next to him and forcing a smile on his face. In response, Kemal Pasha made an apologetic look. He did not expect that the matter would end like this, of course. Kemal Pasha only left the other party with an apologetic expression. He originally had a lot of things to do, but now he has even more things to do. Of course, anything that can be said on this occasion is a big deal. Kemal Pasha later proposed the need to strengthen intelligence work in other Balkan countries to prevent a recurrence of what happened in Bulgaria. This proposal was very important and everyone present unanimously agreed. Just as the meeting was coming to an end, an attendant suddenly rushed in with a telegram. After reading the telegram, the mid-second told a piece of news with an unsightly expression: the Italians landed in Crete. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224, Battle of Crete, Part 1. By the time Istanbul received the telegram that Italy had landed on Crete, it was actually already too late. With the assistance of the Italian Navy, the 1st Marine Division and the Praetorian Guards landed on the island yesterday from Chania, Iraklion and Scythia respectively. The Italian soldiers and soldiers who have landed in 3 places are still fighting with the defenders. The fighting between the two armies has caused a large number of local people to flee their hometowns, but this does not affect the determination of the two armies to fight. Pull. Quickly. Hurry up. Cossents, who was sitting in a small boat, was ordering the soldiers to row hard. They were almost approaching the beach. Surrounding their boat were officers and soldiers belonging to his battalion. They were rowing as hard as the boat Cossents was riding. Yes, this is a ship currently used by the Italian 1st Marine Division to land. Various human-rowed wooden boats are the vehicles they ride on. This kind of wooden ship can transport 20 to 30 fully armed soldiers and their equipment at a time. Although it is a bit slow to use manpower, Marines from various countries currently use this method to land, and everyone has no choice. In front of them, many officers and soldiers have landed on the beach. Those officers and soldiers, led by commanders at all levels, quickly left the beach with weapons in hand. It was the 2nd Battalion of friendly forces behind them. A large number of transport ships were hung with landing ropes, and densely packed officers and soldiers were climbing off the ships and boarding the waiting boats. As for the places farther away, there were warships patrolling. Among them, tall battleships were firing close to the port. Their deafening cannons could be heard even from such a distance. But these have nothing to do with Cossents. He just wants to get ashore quickly, because the period before setting foot on land is the most dangerous moment for himself and the soldiers. Although this area has long been occupied and cleaned up, he just doesn't like this state. Janine Blois: I heard that the group that landed yesterday fought here for a long time with the guarding Ottoman troops and suffered a lot of casualties, but there are no traces of the battle now. Without letting Cossents think about it, the soldiers rowing hard had already rowed the boat to the beach. Cossents jumped off the ship in one swift motion, stretched out his hand to pull the cable, and worked with the soldiers to stabilize the ship. After all the officers, soldiers, and equipment got off the ship, they worked together to push the ship back. The few sailors on the ship who are affiliated with the Navy will continue to pick up the next trip. There were other ships docking that had the same action as Cossents. After unloading soldiers and equipment, they were eager to return to the transport ship to pick up the next group of officers and soldiers. Of course, this seems very fast, but the round trip basically takes an hour. This is all because the speed of human rowing is too slow. Of course, this doesn't matter what Cossents has to do, he still has important things to do. After the 1st Battalion was reorganized, Cossents immediately led them towards Heraklion because they needed to help the friendly forces capture the largest port city in Crete. Within the city, a tough battle is raging. An enemy is approaching. Fire. An Ottoman officer was in a building and immediately shouted loudly when he noticed that intentional officers and soldiers were approaching. Under his order, Ottoman officers and soldiers used hand rifles from windows, behind doors and other positions to fire at the incoming Italian troops. The fierce hail of gunfire and bullets overwhelmed the Italian officers and soldiers, who could only seek bunkers to escape. They were so suppressed that they could not even lift their heads. Captain Hall, who was observing the battle from the sidelines, saw this scene and knew that the attack had failed again. He threw the military hat on his head to the ground angrily. Company commander, company commander. But then someone suddenly called him, and Hall, who was upset by the failure of the attack, raised his head after hearing the voice calling him. This was the messenger from the camp calling him, and behind him were two men dressed as ordinary people. "What's up?" When the battalion commander called him, he asked impatiently, "Captain Hall, these are the locals the battalion commander asked me to send. They are very familiar with this area." The battalion commander said that, if there are any difficulties that cannot be attacked, you can seek help from the locals. Scenes like this are not unfamiliar to Crete. This is the result of many years in Italy. In order to achieve their own goals, local leading figures have given directions to the Italian army, informed them of the deployment of the Ottoman army, and some even boldly took up arms to directly attack the Ottoman defenders. So Crete and Italy are home point. While the messenger was talking, the two locals kept nodding and bowing to Hall. Seeing their performance, Hall looked confused, but none of us understand Greek. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, one of them spoke. "We know some Latin. We learned it when doing business with merchants from your country." This man's words made Hall's eyes widen. "Just give me a pillow if you want to sleep." Then he took the other person, came to the corner, and pointed at a tall independent building at the intersection outside. "Have you seen that building? Is there any way to get around to the back?" The man spoke after seeing the building he was pointing at. "Oh, that's Mr. Carce's construction company you're talking about. It might be a bit far to go around, because it requires walking through 2 blocks." As soon as he heard the other party's words, Hall knew that there was a way out. The other party was indeed a local snake, and he could immediately tell the truth. And when he was about to let the other person lead the way, another man gave him another surprise. "I know a route that doesn't have to go that far." As soon as he heard what the other party said, Hall immediately wanted to ask how to go. Unexpectedly, the man who showed the way just now immediately counterattacked the other party. "What do you know? You smuggling gophers are not doing your business. Don't think you are clean. Even the poor know that you like to be short on weight." Being told about his bad qualities, the profiteer named Blois immediately said something like a machine gun in Greek. Judging from the red face of the smuggler opposite, it must not be something good. Of course, this person was not a vegetarian, and he immediately burst out with amazing fighting power at the same speaking speed. So a smuggler and a profiteer had a machine gun quarrel, leaving Hall and his soldiers stunned. Seeing that the two people were getting more and more noisy, Hall, who felt dizzy from the quarrel, immediately took out his pistol and stood between the two. "Okay, everyone, stop." Perhaps it was Hall's identity, or perhaps it was the gun in his hand that finally calmed down the quarrel between the two. Hall waited for the two to calm down, then pointed at the smuggler. "You just said you knew a shorter route. Now you can say it." "Yes, sir. Because of my usual business, I know some unobtrusive small passages." As the smuggler tells it, he finally learns what the road is. It was a sewer, but it could lead directly to the building. That gave him a headache. Then, "You lead the way for us and leave now." Hall pointed at the smuggler and spoke out his choice. As ordered, "Please follow me, sir." Situations like Hall's can be seen everywhere on the island. In order to give Crete a chance to become independent, the locals have put in a lot of effort, and leading the way is just child's play. Chapter 225 Battle of Crete, Part 2. The battle on Crete is still continuing, but despite the guidance of the leading party, the intensity of the defenders' resistance has not diminished at all. These Austrian officers and soldiers wearing round hats simply live and die with the position. This made the attacking guards and marines very troubled. In fact, anyone with a clear eye can see that the Ottoman defenders can no longer resist for much longer, because the right time, place, and people are not on their side. Defeat is inevitable sooner or later, but the Ottoman army just didn't understand, and must surrender conditionally. The only thing they did was to ensure the safety of their lives and property. Personal safety is okay, but Italy cannot guarantee the safety of property. This is not because Italy must want their property, but that the cretins who are about to become independent, do not want the Ottomans to leave with their property point, because a lot of the property of these people was looted from Crete. This is the people's wealth of Crete, and the Ottomans must spit it out. So how big are these properties? Take Lieutenant General Muktan, the commander of the island, as an example. He currently owns 2.6-3.1 million Ottoman liras in property in Crete. As for other officers at all levels, their property ownership varies according to their positions, but at least it is starting from 50,000 lira. The highest property owner is Edisi, the governor of Crete, who owns property worth 6 to 8 million Ottoman lira. According to Cretan estimates, these Ottomans owned property worth no less than £5 million. Well, since the Cretans demanded so strongly, it was natural for the Italian army, as the liberator, to reject the other party's request. Some may ask, why did the Ottomans leave so much property behind? Shouldn't they have transferred it after the war broke out? The person who asked this obviously didn't know the composition of his property, as most of his holdings were various real estate properties. For example, houses, manors, mines, or shares in factories and workshops, etc. How can this be moved away? Moreover, even if they want to sell it at a low price, it won't work, because the Italians only gave them more than 10 days from the declaration of war to the landing on the island. And who would buy these from them after the war breaks out? There is a high chance of losing all their money. Therefore, in order to protect their property, the local Ottoman army fought desperately. After all, as the old saying goes, people die for wealth and birds die for food. The ancients did not deceive me. However, in the view of General Grove, who commanded this battle, these Ottomans were obsessed with money, and were completely concerned about money, and not their lives. Of course, if General Grove did not discuss with Sori, and others in Crete, how to distribute this wealth, then his words would be more credible. After a while, Hibbuk and everyone on Crete walked into General Grove's headquarters. Hibbuk now serves as a bridge for negotiations between Italy and the Cretans. Basically, if you have any requirements, just ask him. The previous task of finding a guide was General Grover, who asked him to do it. The effect was very good, and the officers and soldiers on the front line recognized it very much. Of course, this is mainly due to General Grove making demands on behalf of Italy, and the Cretans currently have demands from Italy, so they seldom mention them. However, I have mentioned it once before, hoping that Italy can try to take care of the local Cretans when fighting the Ottomans. Faced with such a reasonable request, General Grove certainly agreed. He then asked Italian officers and soldiers not to go too far if they saw people wearing civilian clothes during the offensive battle. General, this is a treaty of friendship and trade signed between our country and the autonomous government of Crete. Before Hibbuk finished speaking, he handed a document to General Grove. Facing the handed document, General Grove put it on the table and looked at the Cretans behind Hibbuk. These people are the members of the Provisional Cretan Autonomous Government, including Sori, the head of the Provisional Government, Hibbuk the Speaker, and others. These people are basically the achievements of Italy before. Of course, judging from the job titles, Solari came out on top and got the position of leader, followed by speaker, minister, and so on. One more thing, the provisional government was established on the day of the landing in Italy. Although this was strongly opposed by the Unionists who wanted to merge with Greece, it was, of course, no matter what their duties were, they all nodded and bowed to express their goodwill when facing General Grover's explanatory gaze. Faced with the goodwill of these people, General Grover did not respond and opened the file and read it. This document is not just about the Ottoman wealth distribution plan, it is also a crucial condition that was negotiated before, and was also required by Italy, to be formally signed on the grounds of the establishment of a new government. General Grove opened the document, and the first page read that Italy and the Republic of Crete were good neighbors and friendly, and the two countries unanimously decided to unify the tariffs between the two countries at 10%. Although this is not as good as the 5% tariff of our warm and hospitable King dynasty in Europe, this is already the lowest between the two countries. In addition to the tariffs, of course, the nascent island of Crete would hire various advisors from Italy to guide the establishment of its government. In addition, the Cretans will also listen to Italy's opinions on the formation of the military and police in the future. It can be said that apart from the fact that Crete has no garrison, the gap between Crete and Italian custody will not be too big. However, Crete is nominally an independent country. This is very important. It is also the reason why Sori and others are facing the United Nations. This is a confident word to say when sending a message. However, General Grove is not completely at ease with the Cretan people who respect him now. After the overall situation is decided, the government will add a chain to these people. Of course it's none of his business. It's very good. I hope our two countries will have good neighborliness and friendship in the future. After a quick glance at the papers, General Grover greeted them. Sure. Seeing the looks of these people, Grover didn't even want to say a few more words. After waving his hands, these people left. After these people left, Grover began to pay attention to the war situation. Although the Ottomans in Crete were currently fighting a trapped beast, he still hoped to deal with the enemy in front of him as soon as possible. You must know that the Praetorian Guards in the 1st Marine Division he led were not just trying to capture Crete, they had many other things to do. But he was not kept waiting long, as a staff officer hurried in. General, the news just came from Chania. We have captured the city and the enemy has fled. Good. Very good. Hearing this news made Grover burst into laughter. Immediately, order the transport ship to go to Chania to unload heavy equipment and then reinforce other places. As you command, General. With the capture of Chania by Italy, a chain reaction seemed to have started. In the following 3 days, other cities were captured one after another. The defeated Ottoman troops of more than 6,000 troops retreated under the leadership of their commander Lieutenant General Muktan. Go to the mountain in the center of the island. Although the Ottoman army has not been completely eliminated, these defeated soldiers have not affected the fact that Italy has captured Crete, and it will be a matter of time before it is eliminated in the future. Although Crete was captured by Italy, this news was not too serious for Istanbul, because there were more serious things that required its attention. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.